Our whole life being turned totally upside down began on June 29th, 2014.
On a beautiful summer Sunday morning, Laura Hevelin was in her home in Tennessee with her husband, Bill. They were getting ready to go to church when they received an awful call.
My son-in-law called probably around 11 o'clock, 11:30 on Sunday morning and told us that Erin was missing. And I'm like, what do you mean Erin's missing?
Bill and Laura hadn't seen their daughter Erin in a few months. Erin recently moved out of the Hevelin family home to start a new life in California with her high school sweetheart and now husband, John Corwin. They moved to a small city called 29 Palms, a blip in the middle of the Mojave. What brought the Corwins there was the Marine base. John was a Marine, Corporal Corwin officially, and Erin was a Marine's wife. They lived on the base in a small apartment, their first home together. Bill and Laura hadn't seen the new place yet. When John called, Laura had been planning a trip out west to visit Erin later that week.
Erin was 19 years old, almost 20. I was going to go out for her 20th birthday.
But then, no one knew where Erin was. On the phone, Erin's husband, John Corwin, told Laura that the last place he knew Erin had gone was Joshua Tree National Park.
And he told me that she had gone out to Joshua Tree National Park the day before to look for places for her and I to go to take pictures and stuff when I came to visit in a few days. My first immediate thought was Erin got lost. Erin is very directionally challenged.
Bill, Erin's father, worried that Erin wouldn't find her way out.
I mean, Joshua Tree is just the desert. There's nothing there. There's no water. It's not like you're going to find anything. There's no shelter of any type. So you're just exposed to the elements.
In addition to her lack of hiking experience, Erin was not particularly prepared for the outdoors.
She was a very petite 19-year-old, 5'2", maybe 115 pounds. She was very shy, extremely naive.
Bill and Laura knew their daughter. This didn't sound like her. She wouldn't go on an overnight hike spontaneously. She probably wouldn't go on an overnight hike at all. Erin was a homebody. She stayed inside her comfort zone. The Hevelins thought through what might have happened and quickly discounted some possibilities.
No, I never thought that Erin had run away. I didn't think that was even remotely a possibility.
I mean, she just was not a risk taker.
Worried, Laura pressed Erin's husband, John, for more details. The last time John said he saw Erin was early the morning before. He said she kissed him goodbye around 7 a.m., and he watched her drive off in their car. He went back to sleep. A while later, he got up and spent the day playing video games. By nightfall, Erin still hadn't come home. She was supposed to be back in time for dinner. But John went to bed. The next morning, according to John, it had been 24 hours since Erin had driven out of sight. John alerted the authorities. Then he called Laura.
He sounded concerned. There wasn't a lot of emotion in his voice, but that's typical John. It's hard to read him, to know what his thoughts are.
I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS, where we take you inside a case NCIS agents say they will never forget. Episode 1, Where is Erin? While his 19-year-old wife was missing, John spent most of the day at home.
He started wondering, where's Erin? And tried to get in touch with her, but could not by phone. He knows there is not good service in the desert, so he didn't worry too much, but then by nightfall, he was worried.
Paul LaRosa is a producer for CBS News and 48 Hours. he reported on Erin Corwin's disappearance. LaRosa had a lot of experience telling true crime stories. He knew that generally when someone goes missing, the first person investigators turn to when they need answers is the spouse. In this case, that was John Corwin.
But he didn't do anything. He didn't call police. He didn't really tell anybody on his base.
So to the authorities, it was initially suspicious that John waited to report Erin missing.
The sheriff's deputies and the sheriff's office had a lot of questions for him. They were like, tell us where she went, what did she have with her? Why did you wait 24 hours to report her missing? His version of the story is that I thought from watching television shows that you have to wait 24 hours before you can report an adult missing. But that makes you seem suspicious in the eyes of the investigators. Also, he had no alibi, per se. He was in his apartment playing video games, and he's an unemotional guy. He's not the kind of guy to say, my wife is missing. He's like unemotional and very flat affect.
Once John finally did alert the authorities, the local sheriff's department in San Bernardino immediately opened up an investigation. But they needed help for this specific case.
The sheriff's department can't just go there and start talking to people. They have to go through protocol, right? They have to alert the military. And when they do, the NCIS gets involved.
NCIS, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Most of us may recognize this name from television.
NCIS. Never heard of it. That's embarrassing.
The television show NCIS follows a cast of characters, including NCIS special agents, field agents, forensic specialists, and more, through 21 seasons of scripted, primetime television drama. But the NCIS is a real-life federal agency. NCIS is sort of like an in-house FBI for the Navy. There are only about 1,000 special agents based all over the world. In Japan, Singapore, Bahrain, Italy, and yes, at the Marine base in 29 Palms, California.
They are stationed at the base, and they get involved, holding the sheriff's department hand to let them know how the military operates.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. was alerted by the sheriff's department that a Marine's wife was missing.
The initial story we received was Erin had gone to Joshua Tree National Park to look for nice hiking routes for her and her mother, who was coming out later on that week. That was the last time that Corporal Corwin had seen her, driving in their blue Corolla away from the installation.
The Marine base, what Special Agent Randolph called the installation, was the largest Marine Corps base in the world. In addition to housing an NCIS office, there were about 900 families who lived on base. By 2013, that included the Corwins. However, the base was not exactly busy. 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa remembered the first time he ever drove by the base.
If you're driving through 29 Palms and you make a left somewhere, and you just drive for about 30 minutes or less, you'll come to the Marine base, which is huge. But there's a big gate. There's a big gate at the base because there's a lot of security, and we were not allowed out there.
If you were a resident of the base, like Erin Corwin was, every time you came home, you passed through a large gated entrance with a security checkpoint. From there, a sort of main street led to a small downtown area of buildings, including offices, a mess hall, a library, a small hospital, and even a bowling alley. Housing for the military families branched off this main area into secluded suburban plots and cul-de-sacs.
From where NCIS's office is located on the installation is not far from where Erin Corwin lived with Corporal Corwin. Practically a mile, maybe two.
The rest of the base's immense acreage, almost 71,000 acres in total, was taken up by vast military training areas, including airfields and shooting ranges.
They fire artillery shells there all the time, and they have, people out in the desert and doing all sorts of things.
In the early 2000s, The majority of units in the Marine Corps deploying to Iraq trained here. Not too far from the base's residential area, there was a sandy stretch protected by mountains named Mini Baghdad. But when Erin moved to the base, her entire world shrunk to those few miles right inside the gated entrance. In such close quarters, Special Agent Randolph said he got to know his neighbors well.
There could have been a chance that you run into her at the grocery store or you pass her at the gym. I might have come across her and not even know it, but there's that person that needs your help and you need to do everything you can to help.
In his office, Special Agent Randolph got to work. His first step was to take what the sheriff's department knew and ask himself, what don't we know?
There was an immediate concern for what could have happened to Erin that she did not return as soon as he thought she was going to.
Special Agent Randolph had questions. What if Erin didn't go where she said she was headed? What if she just got on the highway and drove? But what if she actually was at Joshua Tree National Park? The park is larger than the state of Rhode Island. How could they ever comb through nearly 1 million acres of land? Special Agent Randolph thought through all the possibilities with one main focus.
Where is Erin? You want to find where Erin is. From the moment someone is reported missing and the last person to see that person being Corporal Corwin, Erin's husband, you're racing the clock because you don't know the circumstances that are involved in this person's disappearance.
There was one big problem working against the NCIS agents and Erin: time.
You got to get on it quick because that person might need you sooner than later and time is not on your side.
So Special Agent Randolph dispatched a team of NCIS experts.
I provided analytical support to Cliff Randolph in the Erin Corwin investigation.
Analyst Ashley DeChelfin was sent to the 29 Palms Marine Base from another NCIS office on the Camp Pendleton Marine Base only a few hours away. When she arrived in 29 Palms, she met her colleagues, got up to speed on the investigation, and dove right into work.
I do database checks regularly, review social media, open source information, so whatever's in the news and outlets, and looking for information.
She scrubbed through Erin's social media. It was 2014 and Facebook was all the rage. What was the last thing Erin posted on her profile? When was she last active online?
Basically going onto the internet and searching for all potential information that could be of interest in your investigation.
Like Special Agent Randolph, Analyst DeChelfin understood what was at risk if she missed any detail that could prove vital.
I absolutely felt the pressure and the stress surrounding Erin's disappearance because, as Cliff mentioned, we had limited time and we wanted to find her as soon as possible. So I got to work right away.
In order to find Erin, the agents needed to learn who Erin was. They needed to understand her personality, her temperament, what she liked and disliked. And they needed to understand her relationships, her marriage, and her family. So they picked up from California and headed to Erin's hometown, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where Erin's life began. Erin was born on July 15, 1994. When she was 2 weeks old, her birth mother placed her in foster care. But very soon, Erin found her home.
Erin came to the house when she was 17 days old.
She was an incredible, sweet baby. We were blessed to be chosen to be her parents.
By the time Erin turned 3, the Heavlin family officially adopted her. She joined a house full of siblings.
We fostered several children. We adopted 5 of them. And Erin was the 4th adopted child.
Bill and Laura also had 2 biological children. They all lived together in a nice house in the small city of Oak Ridge, about 25 miles west of Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a hidden city tucked along the Black Oak Ridge Mountains, and for much of its history, it was kept a secret. One of its nicknames is the city behind a fence.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee, if you don't know anything about it, was an atomic city. Oak Ridge, Tennessee did not exist before World War II. And the military built Oak Ridge, Tennessee for people to develop the atomic bomb.
Paul LaRosa visited Erin's hometown, and he noticed a through line from Erin's childhood in Oak Ridge to her future on the Marine base in California.
You couldn't just leave Oak Ridge, Tennessee and go for a drive out into the country. Everything, there was a gate, everything was controlled. It was sort of a sheltered, closed town.
And Erin herself was very sheltered. She was homeschooled, so much of her life took place in the family home.
On Sundays, the family went to the local church.
It was the family, and it was the church, and it was the horse ranch. And that's it.
Now, the horse ranch, the East Tennessee Riding Club, was Erin's favorite place in the world as a child. According to lore, it was like her second home.
Erin spent all her time at the stables, in Tennessee. I mean, her mother famously said she would sleep there if she could.
Erin's mother, Lore, said she was a quiet and shy girl, and sometimes she seemed to be more comfortable around animals than people.
Erin loved the animals, horses, cats, dogs, rabbits, guinea pigs, but they all loved her too. She was like a calming force, and they knew they could trust her, and they knew that she was the one to respect and listen to.
Good boy. Shake.
Erin could even train cats. This was her leading her cat through tricks.
And lay down one more time. Good boy.
Erin was an animal whisperer. She could get them to do things that the average person would not be able to.
So when Erin discovered the East Tennessee Riding Club and began to experience working with horses, she excelled.
When she first started, I assured her we would never get a horse, and we ended up with 2. We spent many hours here.
Another local family, the Corwins, were also frequent visitors.
Erin and John met at the barn.
They met when Erin was in 5th grade. She was 10. John was just a year older.
John's younger sister had a horse there also, and Erin went to their house a couple different times.
In a small city with a sheltered life, Erin found the Corwin family house exciting. She would go and play, but she was always especially shy around John. John seemed shy around Erin too.
John Corwin was a very quiet young man.
They grew up together slowly and patiently at first.
And then once she turned, I think she was 15, and they kind of reconnected and, did a lot of texting and messaging on Facebook and that kind of stuff. And they started dating on her 16th birthday. And John actually asked me if it was okay if he took her out on a date.
John was a serious and stoic teenager. His aspirations were always clear to him.
When they first started dating, he already knew he was going to be a Marine.
At 17, John began the process to join the Marine Corps. He took tests for aptitude and strength, and he planned to go to basic training and boot camp the summer after he graduated high school. And meanwhile, despite their young age, Erin and John became serious fast. They started talking about marriage. Erin, full of excitement, told her mom.
We knew how young and naive she was, and we had hoped that they would wait a couple years so that she could get a little bit of more maturity under her belt.
The couple went to John's senior prom together. Erin was barely 18 when he proposed. This may sound a bit early for marriage, but it isn't that uncommon for a military couple. Young Marines who choose to enlist right after high school
will move to whatever location the military assigns them. And for many young Marines, the path ahead includes marriage. Married couples get preference when it comes to securing housing on base.
The reason why they wanted to get married was to get on the base housing list. And you had to be married, and they knew John was getting ready to be deployed.
So John, like many Marines before him, wanted to start this journey with his high school sweetheart. But Laura wasn't sure Erin understood the reality of marrying a Marine.
We had quite a few conversations on what life as a military wife would be. I tried my hardest to prepare her mentally, emotionally, for what was in her future.
At 18 years old, John chose the Marines.
And Erin chose John.
She went to Las Vegas for the Marine Ball, and they got married while they were in Vegas.
On a beautiful fall afternoon in 2013, Erin was stuck inside unpacking boxes. The tree-lined view from her childhood bedroom in Tennessee was replaced with the sandy expanses and cacti of 29 Palms, California. By all accounts, she was still a newlywed. She and John had not yet celebrated a year of marriage. Despite a condo full of boxes, Erin was alone.
And she moved out there, got their apartment all set up before John got home from his deployment.
John's deployment in Okinawa, Japan, continued on for another few months, and Erin's new life as a 19-year-old Marine's wife began. If she ever felt isolated in Oak Ridge, life on the Marine base challenged her even more. Erin went from living in a house full of siblings to an empty apartment. All she could do was wait for John to come home.
I think Erin was enjoying some aspects of being a Marine wife, and other aspects I think it was harder than what she anticipated.
Erin tried to develop a routine. She went to the commissary a few times a week to pick up groceries. Otherwise, she spent her time watching TV and scrolling Facebook. She texted her friends back in Tennessee often. After a few months, John came home, but not much changed for Erin.
John was not deployed again after she moved out there, but being in artillery, he went out in the field every month for at least 5 days, sometimes more. And so she would be home alone during those times that he was out in the field.
She was lonely. But one day, according to her mother, Laura, things started to improve when Erin made her first friend on base. Erin was busy unloading her saddle out of her car when she bumped into her next-door neighbor.
Nicole and Erin clicked because of the horses.
Nicole Lee lived right next door to Erin and John. She was a fellow Marine's wife. And when Nicole saw Erin carrying a saddle,
She invited Erin to come by the ranch where she kept her horse, the White Rock Horse Rescue. It was just a 40-minute drive from the Marine base. And with Nicole's invitation, Erin was immediately reminded of her favorite place on earth, the riding club in Tennessee. She probably felt a pang of homesickness and excitement.
Erin first came here with Nicole to look at horses, introduced me and said, I want to find a horse. I need a horse. I rode when I was back home. She had a horse and she had to leave it. And so now she was homesick. And so she decided that getting a horse, riding it, would give her some pleasure, some happiness.
Isabel Megley is the founder and CEO of this desert rescue ranch, but she was never tucked away in an office somewhere. Isabel preferred to be outside with the horses and the people who volunteered to take care of them.
I rehabilitate rescued horses that have been abused, and then I also take in horses that aren't abused and find them homes. And then I always invite any individual who would like to come and volunteer at the ranch to help me, because we have no paid employees.
48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa met Isabel while he was covering Erin's story. He reached out to her for an interview, but she never got back to him. He figured they'd visit the horse ranch anyway.
So we go there, and the horses are everywhere, right off the public road. And the ranch itself is absolutely not fancy. I mean, it's very rugged. It's, in a desert community. It's out in the open. And, you just see horses running back and forth. There's a few structures that look like they're down on their luck.
While LaRosa was videotaping the sights on the ranch, he noticed a small group of people approaching him.
It's sort of a ragtag bunch of young children and young people and this older woman. And I said, "Are you Isabel Megley?" I said, "We're from CBS News, blah, blah, blah. I sent you an email. I called you." And she said, "Oh, yeah, I meant to call you back. I just never got around to it." And I said, "Well, we're here now, and we want to talk to you." So once we were face-to-face, she was happy to talk to us. Isabel is a very weathered person. I mean, she's been outside a lot during her life, you can tell.
Isabel was exactly the sort of person Erin knew well, a fellow animal whisperer with a menagerie of pets following her around the land. And when Nicole introduced the two of them, Erin knew exactly how Isabel could help her.
And so when she found her horse, Erin was with Cassie. It was like her partner.
It was decided Erin would volunteer on the ranch. She would pay to adopt a horse and take care of it, and then she'd be able to ride. Many military families from the 29 Palms base enjoyed the ranch. For Nicole, it was a family affair. She'd spend the day at the ranch with her Marine husband, Christopher Lee. Now that included Erin.
So it was like a threesome. So when they would come, they would all take their horses and play with them, and then they would leave together. And they would have a good time, the three of them. It was very rarely the four.
So where was John?
Erin was not supported by John for this activity because he was not interested in it. He would come here with his motorcycles or his things for playing the dirt. And that's what he would do while she would ride. And she'd say, "Please come over and watch me ride my horse." He said, "I'm not interested." So they were never cozy together. I kept waiting, but he was very difficult to interact with.
Isabel felt she came to know their relationship well.
Erin was always fighting with John over what John told her to do. And so she would come here and say, "At least I'm free." And she was a different person. The only one he couldn't control was her relationship with the horse.
Erin would pile in with the Lee family for the ride to and from the horse ranch. Thanks to them, she could see her horse whenever she wanted. Her relationship with the local community grew, while her marriage strained.
I'm a very good judge of animals, and people go right along hand in hand with that.
Isabel welcomed the Marine families onto her ranch, and she observed. Later, she became a valuable source for the NCIS agents working to find Erin Corwin. On Monday, June 30th, 2014, Erin had been missing for 48 hours. News spread across the Marine base quickly.
It was big news for such a small area.
Analyst Ashley DeChelfin had her eye on Erin's social media. She made note of the people who seemed to be close to Erin, who had recently tagged her in a post, who had commented. She searched through Erin's Facebook friends and looked through their friends to figure out how people knew each other. There was a lot of useful information publicly available. Analyst DeChelfin just had to determine which leads were worth following, what was real and what was speculation. In such a small community, this proved difficult early on.
Everybody was talking about it. Everybody was commenting on it on social media. People were looking for her. There was buzz on base, and at certain points it even became like a bad game of telephone.
Before long, the news about Erin reached Isabel's horse rescue.
The phone rings, and Erin Corwin's girlfriend called me and said, "Have you seen Erin?" And I said, no, but she went missing. I said, missing? She said, yeah. And then the detectives started coming. With that was an awareness of all the things I had been watching that happened was a key part of the investigation.
With any missing person, you want to return that person to their family and their loved ones because they care about that person. And from working a case like this, you develop a care for the livelihood of that person. You don't want to see anything bad happen. But in the back of your mind, it's a race against time, and you know that you're running out of it.
For a concerned mother, the waiting game was misery.
We really had no clue what happened. It was almost like we were walking in a different world. Kind of numb.
After the 48-hour mark, with no sign of Erin, it was all hands on deck for the NCIS agents.
As the days go by, it's becoming more and more likely that you're not going to find her alive.
NCIS paired up with San Bernardino's search and rescue team. They had 3 main objectives: to determine a safe plan of action, to locate Erin Corwin, and to bring her to safety. First, they had to assess the situation based on the story John told. They needed to look for clues. Special Agent Randolph and his team knocked on doors on base, asking if anyone had any information about Erin, any other story to corroborate or contradict her husband's. Was John Corwin telling the truth? This season on 48 Hours NCIS, the search for a missing Marine's wife uncovers secrets that nobody expected. On June 30th, 2014, 2 days after Erin Corwin went missing, workers with the local water department in the desert town of 29 Palms showed up to a job by the Marine base. A crew member noticed a car, which was strange. They were in the middle of the Mojave Desert. The car appeared to be abandoned, so they called it in to the police. It was a blue Toyota Corolla, the car Erin Corwin was driving the day she went missing.
Erin Corwin's car was located approximately 2 miles from the back gate of the military base, and that's still significantly far from Joshua Tree National Park's entrance. But why is a car located close to base?
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. and his team tried to make sense of this. Did Erin walk all the way to Joshua Tree to scope out trails for her mom's upcoming visit? They investigated the area, prowled over the sands, and they noticed a second pair of tire tracks. Another vehicle.
Seemed to indicate she didn't go wherever she went alone.
NCIS and San Bernardino authorities followed Erin's shoe prints, walking out of her car and into someone else's. And then they followed the tracks of the second vehicle.
With those tracks ending at the black asphalt road out there.
It appeared that the second car drove off into the desert.
The terrain out there, it's like Mars. I think they did some type of training for the moon mission somewhere in that area.
NCIS analyst Ashley DeChelfin remembers when they initially found the car.
Where the vehicle was found was a clue because it was not found in an area you would think.
It was a much-needed clue, but still.
It's just a question of where is Erin?
In the days after Erin Corwin was reported missing, NCIS and the local police department exhausted all leads. Once they found her car with clear evidence she was with someone else, the search for the 19-year-old Marine's wife gathered speed and urgency.
It was summertime, which gets very hot. It can be very foreboding that there's literally no water available in that area during the day, And at night, there's nothing to light your way and many dangerous animals that are in that habitat.
The harshness of the desert was troubling, to say the least, and time was not on NCIS's side.
Between myself, Cliff, and our program support, the three of us were back and forth, like working long days in and out. And as new leads were developed and information came in, then we just kind of put our heads to the next hurdle or challenge that we needed to overcome.
But some challenges were insurmountable. There was still no trace of Erin after 48 hours, and if she was lost in the desert away from her car, it was hard for Lore, Erin's mom, not to think the worst.
When I found out they found her car without her, that's when I knew something had happened, and I really kind of had that mother gut instinct that maybe she was no longer alive.
Now, it was not just a question of where is Erin, it was also a question of who had been with Erin in the desert.
I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS. Episode 2, The Honeymoon is Over.
This new information, finding Erin's car and the second pair of tire tracks in the sand, changed everything.
The authorities needed to go back over what they knew about Erin's life in 29 Palms before she went missing. They needed to look at 29 Palms as Erin had and retrace her steps in order to identify where she frequented and who she knew. 29 Palms, where Erin was last seen, is a remote desert city over 100 miles outside of LA, and it could not be more different. 29 Palms is sleepy and sparse. Route 62 cuts right through its center. There's a casino, a few hotels, a single Starbucks. For a city, there's a lot of blank, empty space across its 58 square miles. That's about the same size as Disney World.
But it used to be bustling a long time ago. In the 1800s, the area was teeming with gold miners. Legend has it, after a long day's work, they would make their way to the town's main water source, a spring surrounded by 29 palm trees. So when the miners would describe where they had been, they opted for 29 palms, and it stuck.
You could drive through it in, 15 minutes and maybe less.
Here's 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa, who reported on Erin's case.
It's the desert, and the desert draws its own unique brand of people.
There are two sides to 29 Palms. The side connected to the Marines, which is the majority of the population, and then there's a fraction of folks who are locals, with no connection to the base. The two worlds are starkly different, and yet they're constantly colliding.
It's kind of funky in its own way. I mean, you'd probably be surprised, and you'd probably want to visit some of the sort of offbeat shops there.
The locals are known to wear cowboy hats and sport turquoise jewelry. After all, 29 Palms was once a mining town.
There's shops that sell crystals. There's a few places to eat.
Then there's the Marine base. The Marine base entrance is located in 29 Palms, but the base itself is its own entity that exists just outside of the city limits. Nestled up against a mountain range, the base eclipses the city in size at over 1,000 square miles. Marines come from all over the country to serve here at the world's largest Marine Corps training base. And they bring their families. Toward the base entrance, it feels more like a small suburban neighborhood than a military site, with young families living in cul-de-sacs. The grounds are pristine, surrounded by desert and mountain vistas. There is one main strip of buildings where much of base life takes place.
Base like this, you're going to go to the same movie theater. You're going to go to the same watering hole. A lot of the events that are put on base everybody goes to, and you're going to run into each other.
Special Agent Randolph knows firsthand the small-town feel of 29 Palms. He lived in town and commuted to his office on base every day.
There are new people always coming in. There are people always leaving. There are people always returning. Even NCIS, we don't stay there permanently, but you become a part of the community.
If they were going to find Erin, they had to start looking at this particular community. Most of the population are transplants, far away from their hometowns, because the majority of people are connected to the Marine base, which means families are only stationed here for brief periods of time before a Marine is relocated or deployed. Bottom line, military families don't stay in 29 Palms for too long. This is also true for NCIS personnel who get bounced around depending on where they're needed, like Analyst DeChalfin, who transferred from Camp Pendleton, California, to 29 Palms because her help was needed when it came to finding Erin Corwin.
It was my first time at an NCIS field office because prior to that, I had started at our headquarters.
Analyst DeChalfin picked up on the close-knit feel of the 29 Palms Marine Base as soon as she arrived.
There's not a whole lot there. So you really rely on that base life because if you're a dependent spouse and your husband's deployed, then you're socializing with other dependent spouses and everybody's talking.
Erin started making friends with her neighbors like Nicole Lee, who brought Erin to the nearby horse ranch, and she was also a Marine's wife.
So I think for a 19-year-old in that situation, you're trying to find your social circle, you're trying to find your niche, and I think it's easy to get emotionally invested in things that may not be in your best interests that you realize in hindsight.
As the NCIS agents progressed their investigation into Erin's whereabouts, they zeroed in on these social circles. On a Marine base where everyone knows everyone, the agents' investigation revealed that not everyone is who they say they are.
When Erin felt lonely in the close-knit crowd, she'd call back home. It was a big adjustment to live away from home and in such close proximity to other young military couples. She'd tell her mom, Lore, what her new life was like.
There was maybe 6 apartments in this little quad. It was a little 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, didn't need anything bigger. It wasn't fancy, but, it met your needs.
On the base, housing is free. For Erin and John, this was a no-brainer. Plus, the base would be a secure, enclosed neighborhood, giving Erin's family back home much better peace of mind.
He was just starting out in the Marines. He wasn't getting a huge stipend for off-base housing, so they probably wouldn't be living in the nicest area of 29 Palms. And we just felt, we felt like she would be safer on base.
Their housing was on one of the many cul-de-sacs in town. All the buildings look like desert homes, minimalist style with clean lines and neutral colors. Most were equipped with Spanish tile roofs, the ones with clay shingles to manage the internal temperatures during those hot summer days.
In the complex, there were 2 couples in particular who Erin and her husband John connected with. First, Ashleen and Connor Malicky, who lived downstairs, and second, the family who introduced Erin to the White Rock Horse Rescue, Nicole and Chris Lee.
The Lees, their kitchens actually touched. She also made friends with the people that lived below them.
Young husbands and young wives living in the desert with not much to do.
She had a couple other people, but these 3 couples were tight. They did a lot together. Cooked out a lot, would stay up all night, playing board games, whatever, and then would make breakfast together, and the guys would hang out together.
Everyone in that complex, it was sort of like a military Melrose Place.
This is Beth Ford Roth, a public radio reporter who covered Erin's case once news spread that she was missing. and it had spread to many local news stations. It seemed like the media could not get enough of Erin's story, the missing Marine's wife.
She lives in 29 Palms with her Marine husband, Jonathan, and he reported her missing on June 29th.
California, where her husband is stationed. Anyone with information
Her Marine
about
corporal husband reported her missing the day after she disappeared.
As soon as Beth heard about the case, she followed it closely because it was right up her alley.
I am the daughter of a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve and was interested in telling the story that a lot of people don't know, which is military wives serve just as much as their husbands do.
She made it her life's work to write about its intricacies and pitfalls.
So I wanted to cover not just the dry black and white stuff that goes on, a barbecue or a parade or that kind of thing, but just sort of what's it like to raise children on your own when your husband's in Afghanistan? What's it like when he comes back? What kind of support network do they have? I was inspired by my mother, who became an Army wife, just knowing that how alone she felt and didn't really find a support system that she needed.
So Erin's case felt personal. As Beth covered the story, she came to know the people living in Erin's apartment block well. The husbands, all Marines, supported their families financially. The wives were homemakers. The Lees from the horse ranch were older than the other couples by a few years.
Christopher was sort of like the leader of the group.
The guys generally got along.
The three Marines would have cookouts every week. They would drink and just, have a good time together, and they could sort of bond over the different aspects of what it's like to be in the military and where they were deployed, or if they'd been to Okinawa, if they'd been to Afghanistan. Now, the three women were kind of different.
Of the three couples, Erin and John were the only ones without kids. But Ashleen Maliki from downstairs was similar to Erin in temperament, shy and quiet, just trying to be a supportive Marine wife.
I remember Ashleen Maliki saying that her husband had an open door policy, which meant anyone could come in and out, and she sort of went along with that.
Now, Nicole, Chris's wife, was not very popular on base. She was known for being abrasive and maybe even a bit distracted. Neighbors sometimes raised an eyebrow at her parenting of her 6-year-old daughter. According to Beth, Nicole would let her daughter wander around alone in the complex, popping into other people's apartments unannounced. So these three couples may not have seen eye to eye on everything, but in order to avoid total isolation, they stuck together. In different circumstances, these couples could have been in college. In a lot of ways, they still behaved like college kids. According to multiple accounts, the couples partied often, drank heavily, and made questionable decisions, spending their small stipends on luxuries like new clothes and cars. Erin's days transformed from the quiet routine of church in her hometown horse barn to the rowdy world of young Marines. So instead of dorm life, it was base life. Unlike most 19-year-olds whose lives revolve around themselves, Erin's life revolved around the Marines. It was an easy place to feel lost in.
The women sort of followed the men's lead because it's important for Marines to get along with each other. It reflects well, and it might help their chances of getting promoted in the future.
Beth Ford Roth says that the women also had a role to play.
So it's kind of up to the wives to make sure they present a good front, even if maybe they're not going to be best friends with someone, because it's in their husband's best interest to move up the ranks in the Marines.
Erin did her best to play her role as a Marine wife. She made friends with the other spouses, did all the requisite socializing, and when she was asked, she would happily help out her neighbors.
Erin would babysit when Chris and Nicole would go out on dates. Erin just cared for anyone who was vulnerable or smaller than she was, and she really bonded with that little girl and wanted a child of her own.
It was only a matter of time before Erin joined her neighbors in motherhood, another duty of a Marine wife. But this she was excited for. Her babysitting on the base struck a chord in her heart. Back home in Tennessee, Laura noticed her daughter nurturing children often.
She was very tenderhearted, very attentive to people. Like the younger kids at the barn and at church absolutely loved Erin because when they talked to her, she made them feel like the most important person there.
It was in those moments that the true Erin would come out of her shell.
She looked at them. She got on their level if they were younger. And she wasn't one of those people that looked around to see who else she could talk to while they were talking to her. They were her focal point.
Erin missed her own childhood home full of kids. After 4 months of living in 29 Palms, she couldn't wait to get back home for Christmas in Tennessee and spend some time with her family.
We got to spend, I think, like 10 days with them or so.
Soon after the visit was over, Laura got a call from Erin.
And right after they got back, she found out she was pregnant.
From the very beginning of their relationship, John and Erin both wanted to have children and start a family together.
Erin was very excited to be pregnant. They wanted, and they're both great with kids.
It was the beginning of 2014. John and Erin couldn't be happier, gushing about the pregnancy. Erin took to Facebook, "Guess what? I'm pregnant," with images of a stork flying through the clouds. Her Facebook friends, people from Tennessee and 29 Palms, congratulated her, so excited for her new chapter. She was in her first trimester, around 8 weeks.
And by the end of January, maybe the first part of February, she miscarried. Erin wasn't sure how to deal with something like that. She was a baby.
For anyone, a miscarriage is a painful experience. But for such a young couple, it was devastating. Territory they were not equipped to navigate.
And I don't think either one of them knew how to handle that grief process, to lose the baby and the hormones doing crazy things to you.
The miscarriage took its toll on John and Erin, but it was not the first issue they had in their marriage. When John finally arrived at 29 Palms after his deployment, Erin said she sensed a shift in him. He wasn't the sweet boy she came to love in Tennessee anymore. He started to harden and became distant. The two started fighting more and more. Here's reporter Beth Ford Roth again.
They went from having sort of a sweet, romantic dating relationship where they'd go out for French fries and a soda to a full-on marriage with the possibility of being parents or not being parents, what it's like to have to pay bills, what it's like to have to get along with people who aren't from Tennessee. And so that the change would be difficult, I think, for anyone, but they were 18, 19 years old.
Beth thinks that at 19, Erin and John were still trying to figure out who they were.
John, as I think any teenage husband, would have difficulty communicating his sorrow, his grief, or understanding how his wife felt. And there was a split there.
From afar, Erin's mother, Laura, noticed the couple was struggling.
I think that's kind of when things kind of started spiraling.
Just over 48 hours after Erin's disappearance, in the rolling sands of the Mojave Desert, the authorities gathered around Erin's blue Corolla. NCIS Special Agent Randolph needed to keep track of all the evidence found by Erin's car.
Looking around that vehicle, trying to find any clue that would have led to where she went to next from that location, where that vehicle was parked, and if anybody else was there with her.
The car was found just a stone's throw away from the Marine base. It was clear she was not alone when she left for the desert. Specialists were called in to look at the tire tracks. The desert sand held the tread well, and the specialists were able to create three-dimensional impressions of the tracks. The design of the tread and its dimensions can help positively match the tire to a type of vehicle. Investigators determined that the car that had pulled up next to Erin was a Jeep. Now, this was something the NCIS agents could work with. But first, they had to question Erin's husband, John, again, the last known person to have seen her.
When was the last time you saw her? Where did she say she was going to go? Does she have any friends? And that's where Jessica comes in.
Jessica, known as Jessie, was Erin's closest friend back home in Tennessee. Erin and Jessie texted daily, often hourly, ever since Erin moved to 29 Palms.
Jessica Trenton reached out to John Corwin the day after Erin disappeared. She disclosed information related to those messages that she had with Erin because she was concerned that Erin didn't return.
Analyst DeChelfa knew it was time for NCIS to use its network and reach to locate Jessie and learn everything she may know.
We contacted our agent out there close to Jessica, asked him to get all that information from Jessica.
My name is Sean Nash. I'm a special agent with NCIS assigned to the Memphis, Tennessee office, and I was asked to run some leads on the Erin Corwin investigation.
The NCIS Tennessee office was small. Only 2 agents ran it, including Special Agent Sean Nash.
We cover all of Tennessee and all of Arkansas. So if there's anybody that needs to be interviewed, anybody needs to be interrogated, evidence needs to be collected, that kind of thing. If an NCIS office across the world needs something done in those 2 states, they call us and ask us to do it for them.
Special Agent Nash made his way to Jessie as soon as he got the call. Luckily, Jessie was ready to tell all. She told him that initially she was nervous to share information. But now, her fear for Erin's well-being overcame her loyalty.
Jessica was very concerned about her friend, Erin, and was upset. So she was very cooperative and helped us in any way that we needed.
Special Agent Nash's main objective was to copy everything off Jessie's phone, especially her text messages with Erin.
The text messages explaining the locations she might have gone would be important. Timelines would be important. The 29 Palms NCIS office was very eager to get these because this would explain who she was with prior to her disappearance.
The NCIS has a digital system for things like this. The software itself can extract a variety of data from devices, including call logs, texts, photos, browsing history, and more.
We tried to download her information from her cell phone.
The system should duplicate all the info and data from Jessie's cell phone onto the NCIS database. Special Agent Nash linked Jessie's phone to it using a laptop and tried to begin the download. Unfortunately, there was a problem. An error message popped up.
She had just gotten a new phone, brand new phone. Her other one had broken, and so the system did not have the updates for her brand new phone.
Even with some of the best available tech, it was no match for an updated smartphone. They'd have to do it the old-fashioned way.
Special Agent Nash looked through all her messages, cataloged them manually by taking pictures of Jessie's phone with his phone.
And during the manual search, we identified several text messages that were important to the investigation.
As he combed through Jessie's texts with Erin, Special Agent Nash found a name.
Christopher Lee was a Marine that was the next-door neighbor of Erin Corwin at the time. And there were some text messages that involved him and Erin Corwin.
According to the text between Erin and Jessie, Erin was planning on meeting Chris Lee in Joshua Tree National Park the day she went missing. Chris Lee, Nicole Lee's husband and Erin's neighbor.
The day before Erin went missing, she had texted her friend Jessica. Apparently, this surprise trip is super important.
You know, I had heard of Chris Lee before. I knew that they had hung out together. It seemed kind of odd to me that she'd be going out there with, just Chris.
That's the question on everyone's mind. Why would Erin go into the desert alone with her neighbor, Chris Lee? What surprise could he possibly have for her? And why didn't she tell her husband about it?
Because she was a secret, so I could tell her my secrets.
That's next episode on 48 Hours NCIS. Alone in a chilly room in the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department, Corporal John Corwin sat with his feet flat on the floor, back straight, and sensors wrapped around his chest and abdomen. He was hooked up to a polygraph, with wires running from his fingers to the machine next to him.
The first suspect when Erin went missing was her husband, John.
Beth Ford Roth is a reporter who covered Erin's disappearance.
He waited 24 hours to call to say that she was missing. He said it was because watching true crime programs, he believed he had to wait 24 hours. I'm sure authorities always look at the spouse first.
So the authorities called him in. Once hooked up to the polygraph machine, they tracked changes in John's heart rate and blood pressure. 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa heard how that day went.
The sheriff's deputies and the sheriff's office had a lot of questions for him. They were like, tell us where she went. He didn't know. Tell us, what did she have with her? A bottle of Gatorade.
So far, John seemed to be keeping his cool. He wasn't showing the type of physiological reactions people have when lying, the type of responses that polygraphs are known for exposing, like increased sweating, heavy breathing, and an elevated heart rate. According to NCIS analyst Ashley DeChalfin, that was enough for the Sheriff's Department to determine that John was telling the truth.
When San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department conducted the polygraph examination on Jonathan Corwin, they did not detect any deception.
John had passed his polygraph examination, and that confirmed what Erin's mother, Lore, already thought.
I never suspected John. Never crossed my mind.
The authorities floated another theory, one that seemed to come out of left field. Was it possible that Erin had been planning to leave John? Maybe there hadn't been foul play, but instead she ran away. Erin's mother, however, didn't buy that theory at all. Remember, Lore had planned to visit for her daughter's 20th birthday. Instead, she ended up flying out after Erin disappeared.
And when I got to her apartment, all those ingredients for the meals that she wanted me to cook were there. She was pretty excited about Mom coming and cooking her favorite meals. Erin was not planning on going anywhere.
So that means someone else must have been responsible. With her husband John Corwin ruled out, it was time for the authorities to look at the next suspect on their list.
I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS. Episode 3, Russian Roulette. Lore Hevelin arrived in California shortly after she found out that Erin was missing. She knew that the chances of Erin making it out alive were not high, but still she was her mother. She had to remain hopeful, and she knew that if they did find Erin, the very first thing she would want was her mother. Lore was staying at Erin and John's apartment, along with John's parents.
The first night, we all spent the night in the apartment, and the sheriff's department had knocked on the door and they were going to interview us. So we all get up, and they just took us individually and just, pretty much asked us about our relationship with Erin.
Despite their jurisdiction over all of San Bernardino County, the Sheriff's Department couldn't just walk on to the military base. That's where NCIS came into play. Together, they went door to door, taking hours to speak to everyone they needed to. Beth Ford Roth heard the details of those interactions after the fact.
The sheriff's deputies went upstairs to talk to Christopher Nicole Lee. And Chris answered the door. He was very nervous. He said he was in a hurry. And the sheriff's deputy asked him, "Do you know Erin Corwin?" And he said, "She's my neighbor, but I mean, we're acquaintances. I know her husband, but yeah, we're not close." And he had to go somewhere. He just ended the conversation right away.
Up until that point, Christopher Lee appeared to be a background figure in Erin's life, someone she knew loosely from babysitting his daughter or would occasionally see at the horse ranch with his wife, Nicole. But as we found out in the previous episode from NCIS Special Agent Sean Nash, Erin had told her best friend Jessie that Chris was planning some kind of surprise for Erin, a trip to Joshua Tree National Park. That in itself was not suspicious. It was a pretty normal place to visit while living on the 29 Palms military base. But was it a trip that two acquaintances would make, and without their spouses? San Bernardino sheriffs were not convinced, so they brought Chris back in to get a better sense of who he was and how he had met Erin, details that they hadn't been able to suss out in their first quick conversation with him. He entered the sheriff's department. Chris was stocky, with a round face and broad shoulders. He was somber, with dark hair and matching dark brown eyes. He sat down. The interview started out slowly. They needed to establish a rapport with him, so he would be comfortable sharing information that could help them down the line.
Okay, some of the follow-up question stuff that I need to ask you a little bit, just to kind of close up some of these gaps.
They talked for a while about his childhood. He grew up in Anchorage, Alaska, with a sister and two brothers, and played high school football. It was also where he met his wife, Nicole, before he became a Marine and moved to 29 Palms. He couldn't recall answers to everything they asked about, though, like past trips or minor things about his own personal life. The police tape you're about to hear is a little hard to understand.
My memory is really, really bad anymore.
Okay. Just from fighting or?
Football, explosions.
He said his memory was really bad because of football and his proximity to explosions while serving in the military. Unless he experienced something impactful, Chris generally couldn't remember it. With that in mind, officers moved on to what Chris had been up to lately and his future plans. He was set to be released from active duty on July 6, 2014, just a few days away. The process for being discharged had started months before this. First, Chris, like all Marines, had to take a transition readiness seminar. Then he needed to complete and submit an outbound review, get that review approved, and complete a final physical. Even with all that done, Chris and Nicole still needed to clear out their apartment and rent a U-Haul to get it all back to Alaska. He'd had a lot going on in the last few months, and it was during this long transition period that he'd also met John and Erin.
I met her. She moved in before he got back. We didn't really, it was just kind of like, hey, you're the new neighbor, what's up? Didn't really have any interaction with her until John got back from Okinawa.
They were neighbors, but he didn't actually interact with Erin until John came back from his deployment in Japan. It was then that Chris and Nicole started hanging out with them as a couple, along with their downstairs neighbors, Connor and Ashleen Maliki. Chris was already close with Connor and would regularly go out into the desert to go coyote hunting, shoot pellets, or race their cars.
There's a road back here that kind of makes a really nice racetrack. I like to, see how fast I can drive on the Jeep on the cars and stuff like that. So.
Out in the desert, Chris said he liked to see how fast he could race his Jeep. When John Corwin returned from his deployment, he became a part of their group. They talked about their jobs and being in the military, had cookouts together, and bonded over being far away from their homes with few friends and little to no familial support in California.
Despite his blossoming friendships and the fact that he would soon be out of the military, Chris was struggling. He had had one 6-month tour of duty in Afghanistan, but he'd been back for a year and had become depressed when it became clear he would not be redeployed. He told investigators it was easier there in Afghanistan. All you have to do is, quote, wake up stand post, call patrols, simple stuff, with no real-life type responsibilities. He came home and had a difficult time adjusting to life after deployment.
And like my emotional state was like I didn't get anything. Like I was just kind of falling apart mentally.
Chris said he was falling apart mentally. It was hard for him to be at home. He and his wife Nicole had gotten used to being away from each other and no longer knew how to communicate. He said they'd argue over minor things, like whether she made dinner the right way. When she told him she thought he needed help, he didn't want to listen. There was a tension in the air. He'd be drinking. They'd occasionally blow up at each other.
It's weird because like you're there and like you miss someone a lot and you come back and it's like it's not the picture perfect thing you had in mind, and so like.
Beth Ford Roth recalled hearing stories about Nicole while covering the case.
Nicole was not a well-liked lady in that area. She was gossipy. She had sort of a bad reputation about things that may have happened in other housing complexes and relationships, just gossip, Melrose Place gossip, basically.
In the house and outside of the house, Nicole was not the most popular person. To many people on and around the base, she was abrasive, strict, and controlling, telling Chris what he could and could not do. According to multiple people in Erin's life,
Her spouse, John, was also controlling of her spending and her ability to get a job. When she bought a puppy to keep herself company, he made her get rid of it. The greatest solace she could find was at Isabel Megley's horse ranch.
But even when she was alone and away from John, she still didn't feel free.
She felt like she was being controlled.
That's 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa.
They had 2 cars, but when one car broke down, they only had 1 car. So sometimes Erin was by herself without a car on this isolated military base.
So it meant a lot to Erin that Chris Lee would sometimes drive her, along with Nicole, to the horse ranch. And as they got to know each other better in the context of the neighborhood and the stable, they realized just how much they had in common.
Back in the interrogation room, Chris had finally started sharing information that was useful to the authorities. He had a lot to say about Erin and John's relationship, some that was frankly shocking, even to investigators. He said Erin was unhappy, that she was scared of John. To Chris, it sounded like a cry for help, one that he could do something about. And in the process, maybe she could help him too.
I was like, oh, I can fix this. Like, broken pieces fix each other. So we just kind of started developing a bond that grew stronger. It was just like, she was like a distraction from everything else that was going wrong in my life.
Chris said they were both distractions for each other. Erin had met someone who was passionate about her interests, who understood how trapped she felt. And Chris had someone to nurture him, to take care of him.
He told police something else that revealed just how close to the edge he'd been.
I was playing Russian roulette 3-4 times a week, like not caring about anything.
Chris told the sheriff's deputies that he was playing Russian roulette multiple times a week. He told them that he had stopped caring about anything, including whether he lived or died. But talking to Erin, commiserating and playing video games together gave him something to care about, something to live for.
Over time, we started getting closer, having longer conversations.
It wasn't difficult for producer Paul LaRosa to piece together how those longer conversations turned into something more.
It starts as an emotional affair, right? I mean, Erin's depressed, Chris is depressed. They confide in each other. They bond over their love of horses. He was in a lot of ways what John was not. He was more emotional. He had more character. He had more personality. He was the polar opposite of John, her husband.
But like many emotional affairs, it didn't just stop there.
And then we kissed a few times at her place.
They had kissed multiple times at Erin's place. They had now connected on an emotional and physical level that Erin was missing with John. Chris had started writing poetry for her. He sent loving texts. He told her they were perfect together. Just like Paul LaRosa, Beth Ford Roth could also understand exactly how this affair came to be.
Having been a 19-year-old girl myself, you fall in love like there's no tomorrow. And I believe that Chris said all of the right things that Erin needed to hear. He was a poet, or a self-proclaimed poet, and he wrote love poetry to Erin. I don't know any 19-year-old girl who wouldn't be impressed with that, especially if she feels like her husband is not emotionally there for her at this critical time.
Soon, instead of Russian roulette, Chris was getting his thrills from Erin. He'd have an argument with Nicole and immediately text Erin. She was an escape from the real world, where he could make believe that he was in a happy place. He could confide anything and everything in her.
Because she was a secret, so I could tell her my secrets.
Because she was a secret, Chris could tell her all of his own secrets. At this point, Erin Corwin and Christopher Lee were having a full-blown affair, mentally and physically, and had been for months.
They were able to keep it hidden at first, but then, Beth says, things got a little precarious for everyone.
So it was Valentine's Day of 2014, and the military families all sort of got together. The little military Melrose place got together to watch a movie, Moulin Rouge.
They met at the Malikys' downstairs apartment. At some point, the party broke up. John went back upstairs. Ashleen Maliky, who had a 6-month-old baby, went to her room to put the baby to bed. Chris and Erin stayed. That's when Ashleen came back out to fix a bottle for the baby.
And saw that Christopher Lee and Erin Corwin were still there on the couch together, and she saw them kissing.
Chris and Erin had gotten so wrapped up in each other that they had actually kissed out in the open in their neighbor's apartment. They may have been living in a fantasy world, but unfortunately, the consequences of their actions were about to get very real.
So after Christopher got up and left Ashleen's apartment, Ashleen went over to Erin, who was still on the couch, and confronted her and said, I saw you kissing. What are you doing? You can't do this. And Erin told Ashleen that they weren't kissing, that Chris was whispering something to her. He was trying to comfort her. Ashleen knew what she saw. It's kind of hard to mistake passionate kissing with whispering.
It put Ashleen in an incredibly awkward position. She and her husband, Connor, were friends with both the Lees and the Corwins. They saw each other in the apartment complex every day, and now Ashleen couldn't make eye contact with any of them.
She didn't know why Erin wasn't being honest with her, because the two had shared a pretty meaningful friendship, and Erin basically left, and that was kind of the end of their friendship.
Weeks went by, and when it became clear that neither Erin nor Chris was going to own up to what they did, Ashleen could no longer keep quiet.
Ashleen said that she told Nicole and John, and that's how the spouses found out.
After that, Chris said Nicole went through his phone. She found their texts, came into the bedroom, and threw the phone at his head. Things grew increasingly tense within their small bubble. The friendships they once shared were no longer. To make amends, Erin and Chris promised to put an end to their affair. But Nicole had already made up her mind about Erin. Amiable interactions turned into stony silence. Trust that had previously formed while Erin babysat the Lee's daughter went out the window. Nicole went so far as to try to ban Erin from one of the only places where she had the freedom to be herself, Isabel Megley's horse ranch.
Nicole came to me and told me that Erin wasn't allowed at the ranch anymore. She has done some unforgivable acts, and that she told her she couldn't come here. Nicole's anger towards Erin was so dynamic. The words she said I couldn't repeat. She said, I wouldn't care if she died. She said she was unspeakable, what she's done, but never would she say what she did.
Despite his own tense relationship with Erin, John seemed more understanding of her indiscretion and wanted to work together to leave it in the past, according to Beth Ford Roth.
Erin told John that the affair was over. They went to couples counseling. John was under the impression that things were improving. They were trying to have a child, and John believed that things were going in the right direction.
Erin's mother, Laura, knew that Erin and John were young and naive, but she believed their relationship was solid. When she came out to California after her daughter was reported missing, she was shocked to find out about the affair that Erin had been carrying on. She'd had no idea. That information, it seemed, was reserved for Jessie, Erin's best friend in Tennessee.
Erin definitely confided in Jessie in a different way than she confided with me. I know now that Erin had shared about her affair with Chris to Jessie. I feel like she knew what she was doing was not right, and that I would probably try to talk her out of what she was doing, whereas Jessie was going to be more accepting.
For Sean Nash, the NCIS special agent who interviewed Jessie, this was far from the first time he'd seen something like this play out.
While I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, there was a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-old Marines living aboard the base. We had seen a lot of young Marines get married before they deployed, and then they would leave their spouse for a long period of time. There were a lot of instances where the spouses would be cheating on their deployed husbands or wives, and one of the common themes is the spouse left behind is lonely and will reach out for other people for companionship.
It's important to understand just how high the stakes are for committing adultery while in the military. Not necessarily for Erin, but for Chris.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. has seen what happens to military members who engage in extramarital affairs.
To have an extramarital affair is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Someone that is found guilty of it will be subject to military criminal prosecution.
Adultery falls within NCIS's jurisdiction to investigate. While it's not a criminal offense for civilians, the military doesn't take kindly to cheating. It can even lead to a dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and up to 1 year of confinement in a military brig. That may seem extreme and old-fashioned, but the Uniform Code of Military Justice exists to ensure professionalism and discipline within the military.
A core component of this code is the rule that any action that could discredit the armed forces can be prosecuted, from adultery to bigamy, even writing bad checks. It's a catch-all intended to, quote, maintain the military's moral fabric. It's as serious as it sounds, and everyone within the armed forces is aware of it. So there's a very good reason why Chris may have first lied about the extent of his relationship with Erin. A dishonorable discharge would put his entire future at stake, likely revoking his access to VA benefits, unemployment, and federal student loans, and severely limiting any post-military career opportunities. It would follow him for the rest of his life, and as someone whose discharge from the military was fast approaching, admitting to an affair wasn't something Chris could afford. And all of this in response to an affair that only lasted a few months. After all, Erin and Chris ended things after their spouses found out.
But according to Jesse, that's not actually what happened. Beth Fortroth recounted the full story.
She's the only one who knew that that relationship was still ongoing. Erin's spouse, John, and Chris's spouse, Nicole, both had found out about the affair, and everyone believed it was over, but it wasn't.
And from there, things only got more complicated. Not only had they continued their affair in secret, but Special Agent Sean Nash in Tennessee had uncovered another shocking piece of information.
Jessica had told us that Erin was 3 months pregnant and that the baby might have been Christopher Lee's.
Erin was pregnant again.
I did not know that Erin was pregnant.
Her mother learned about this pregnancy for the first time when she arrived at the Corwins' place in California.
John knew about the pregnancy. They found out on Father's Day, and they told his dad on Father's Day that she was pregnant.
Despite knowing about her pregnancy for 2 weeks, Erin hadn't told her mother anything. She'd been open about her first pregnancy and miscarriage. So why not this one? Erin's lack of communication with her mother left everyone with questions. What else had she been holding back? And depending how far along she was, whose baby was it?
With John and his family, Erin had acted like the baby was his. But with Jesse, Erin was adamant that the baby was actually Chris Lee's.
At the prospect of having Chris's baby, Erin seemed excited and hopeful. Happily ever after with John didn't seem to be in the cards. He was too cold, too controlling, too uninterested in her hobbies. But Chris made her excited. Chris gave her purpose. According to Beth,
Chris, he made her feel like she was the reason he was alive. She was his reason for living.
Maybe Chris could be her happily ever after. Police even found information on Erin's laptop about apartments in Alaska. She'd been seriously thinking about their future together.
So Erin texted her friend Jessie in Tennessee that Chris was very excited about it, that he wanted to tell everyone. He wanted to tell Erin's mother. It was going to be this big announcement that Erin was pregnant, they were in love, and they were going to move to Alaska together because Chris was getting ready to leave the Marines. And that's what Erin thought was happening, and that's what she conveyed to her friend Jessie.
Now, Chris and Erin's upcoming surprise trip to Joshua Tree made much more sense. It was a perfect place to be alone together, something that was hard to come by in their apartment complex where they were constantly under watchful eyes. Erin seemed thoroughly convinced that both of them were in it for the long haul. That much was clear to analyst Ashley DeChelfin.
It seemed that Erin was in love with Christopher Lee because she was willing to take that next step with him in her life. And I don't believe personally that she would have done that if she didn't really care about him.
NCIS agents were now convinced that Erin was in love with Chris. She was serious about their future. But the question remained, was Chris also in it for the long haul? Or did he have other plans? On the next episode of 48 Hours NCIS, what else was Chris Lee hiding?
We're going to find Erin. Right now, the Marine Corps base is helping us. They are gathering as many soldiers as they possibly can to go out and start checking all these areas. We're going to find her.
A warning to listeners, this episode contains graphic depictions of violence. Chris Lee was going to be out of the military soon. He was just days away from being honorably discharged. While the cloud of suspicion for Erin Corwin's disappearance hung over him, no charges had been filed against him. The Lees had planned their move back to Alaska, where Chris was from, but before they left,
they won't have a home because they're out of their barracks.
That's White Rock horse rescue owner Isabel Megley. Chris and Isabel had spent a lot of time together at the ranch, so they had become friends at this point. When Chris was in a jam, he asked Isabel if his family could stay at the ranch while they planned their move to Alaska.
We made this agreement. I said, well, you can stay at the bunkhouse until you leave, 7 days. How innocent was that? But that's not how it turned out.
Once Erin Corwin went missing, the police had started to suspect that Chris might be connected. But they still hadn't found her, and all the evidence against Chris was circumstantial or hearsay. They needed something firm.
The police were here, the detectives were here. He had his U-Haul here, and they wanted to go through his U-Haul. They had him handcuffed to the chairs over at the house. While they did this, they checked my house. They did not think I was involved, but my vehicles were involved because Chris Lee had used them.
The police didn't find a literal or figurative smoking gun in Chris's belongings, but they knew a lot about him, that he had been having an affair with Erin, an affair that continued in secret, even after they were exposed. Before Erin disappeared, she'd been texting her friend Jessica, or as she called her, Jessie, about her relationship with Chris. But there was one message that caught the eye of the police, a text that gave them a clue on where they'd find Erin. This is NCIS agent Sean Nash, who saw the text.
This text message referred to a trip that Erin and Christopher Lee had made the day before she went missing.
All Chris told Erin was that this trip was going to take a couple of hours, and Erin thought this meant she was in for some big romantic gesture.
Erin had texted Jessica, "Laugh out loud, I seriously don't know why he would drag to a very special place to be a dumb surprise." Jessica had texted back to Erin some emojis with a ring and a diamond and then kiss symbols. I would assume that would be an engagement ring.
The detectives knew the trip would likely have been out to the Mojave Desert surrounding Joshua Tree, but they didn't know which specific part. The search and rescue teams were beginning to look for Erin, and learning where she could have gone with Chris could be the key to finding her. I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS, Episode 4, The Perfect Mine. Erin's car was found on July 1st, 2014, a few days after she went missing. The car was parked just a few miles outside the 29 Palms military base, with nothing missing or really any sign of disturbance. There was, however, another pair of tire tracks.
When San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department located Erin Corwin's car, the tire impressions surrounding the car did not match Erin's car.
This is NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr., who worked with the Sheriff's Department and local detectives on Erin Corwin's case. Special Agent Randolph says that it looked like Erin drove out to this spot to meet up with someone in a second car, then went out to the desert.
It seemed that someone drove out to that location and she got out of the car, got into this other vehicle, and went somewhere else, with those tracks ending at the black asphalt road out there.
Investigators believed that the tracks were left by a Jeep, and it just so happens Chris Lee drove a Jeep. This was one of the reasons that the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department initially brought him in for questioning 3 days after Erin's disappearance. You already heard some of what he said, his issues with memory loss, challenges adjusting to life after deployment, and how he met Erin. In video of the interrogation, Chris sat down under the dim hum of fluorescent lights in a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. The detective sat across from him at a small table and asked about his plans for the future.
I think we're going to live with her brother, because we got our 2 horses that we're shipping up there. And then I'm going to use my GI Bill to try and get a chemical engineering degree.
Chris told the detective that in the coming weeks, his family would be driving cross-country to Alaska, where he grew up, to start a new life.
Yeah, it's scary. But I'm ready for a change. My wife, she's definitely ready to get out of here.
This interview was a very important opportunity for the detectives on Erin's case. Chris wasn't named a suspect at this point. He was invited in to answer a few simple questions about Erin. The detectives had an opportunity to talk to Chris without a lawyer and to get his story on the record. They also could use information to their advantage. Chris did not know what the detectives knew, that he'd been having an affair with Erin, her pregnancy, and the possible proposal, and that the two had planned a mysterious trip out to the Mojave Desert just before Erin vanished.
Then they started to talk more about Chris and Erin's relationship. Chris admitted that he and Erin became an emotional support system for each other, and that the relationship turned physical. He also talked about his wife, Nicole, when she found out about the affair, and the effect it had on their marriage.
And during the time that you were texting Erin, how was your relationship with Nicole?
It was under a lot of duress, a lot of strain. She kept trying to talk about things, and I just kept shutting her out.
Our relationship was under a lot of strain, Chris said. She kept trying to talk about things, and I just kept shutting her out. He called Erin his make-believe wife. But while recounting their affair, Chris also seemed to downplay it. They only kissed a few times, Chris said. That's where things stopped, according to him. That was a reckoning point. He broke things off with Erin after they got caught.
And then that was the end of it.
Okay, and
that was kind of my reckoning point where I realized, I was messed up and I needed to ask for help.
Now the detectives tried to get more details. They wanted to get Chris to describe what he was doing in the days leading up to Erin's disappearance. Chris did not know that the investigators had found Erin's car and that they believed he might have been out in the desert with her. The detective asked Chris, when was the last time he saw Erin?
And then you saw her Wednesday of last week?
I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I just know this because her and John.
Wednesday. That was 3 days before Erin went missing. But then Chris second-guessed himself. I'm not 100% sure, Chris said. She and John had come out of the house, but I would usually try to avoid them. When detectives asked for more specifics, Chris's memory got hazy once again.
So would you see their cars there on the weekend?
Sometimes. I really don't keep track of other things. And so like I said, unless she fixes something wrong or different, I don't really remember.
Sometimes I don't keep track of things. I don't really remember, he said. Chris referenced memory problems several times throughout the interview, sometimes blaming shell shock or PTSD.
Then the detective started asking Chris about the desert. While they talked, volunteers were searching the desert for any evidence of Erin. So the detective wanted Chris to piece together his whereabouts. Where did he go around the time Erin went missing?
Maybe if he told them about his trips out to the desert, he'd give up a piece of information that might help them find Erin. The detective asked about Saturday, June 28th, the day Erin went missing.
Went to bed at midnight. What time did you wake up Saturday?
6, about.
Okay.
Because I was going to go coyote hunting that morning. Actually, I went coyote hunting that morning.
Chris said he woke up that morning and went coyote hunting alone. And then he guided the police along the route he took.
So I went by myself. And then I went down Adobe, took a left on 62, took
Chris's story had morphed and changed several times over the hours he spent in that interrogation room, but it was couched in hazy recollections and other memory problems, Chris said. Then Chris's story took a wild turn. It's at this moment, as he described wandering around the desert coyote hunting, that Chris said he heard gunfire.
And then I got kind of lost. And at one point in time, I'm not sure the time of the day that I checked, but I'm not sure if the individual shot at me or if it was just like recreational shooting. But there was an individual.
Chris said that he heard 4 booms, claiming that he saw someone out there with a handgun.
I turned and it went like this, boom, 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 boom. And I heard 4 shots as I was coming back down the bridge line.
I got out of there as fast as I could, Chris said. He said he couldn't tell if they were intentionally shooting at him or not. While Chris told this story, he gave detailed descriptions of where he went. Chris talked the detective through his hiking trails that carved through the mountains and dunes in the desert. He even marked up a map that the interrogators brought in to show them where he went.
Just put like an X where your house is at. Okay, and then so you go out that way to the 62 to Gold Crown. Did you make any other stops prior?
Whether he knew it or not, Chris gave investigators tons of details to work with, evidence that could help the search and rescue efforts for Erin that were continuing in the desert. Chris could be telling the police which parts of the vast desert to focus on. The Mojave Desert stretched on for thousands of miles, and dotted through it were the landmarks of a literal golden age, the hundreds of abandoned mine shafts that filled the horizon. The desert is at the edge of 2 plates of the Earth's crust. That collision meant that this land was rich with minerals, ore for iron and steel, but most importantly, gold. So during the gold rush of the mid-1800s, people started coming from around the world to scour this land for wealth. More kept coming and making money through World Wars I and II before the resources started to dry up. The legacy of that time were the abandoned shacks, mills, railways, and mine shafts carved out of the earth that dot this sandy landscape. This is where the investigators were looking for Erin Corwin. She'd been missing long enough that the teams had to prepare themselves for the possibility they were looking for her body. The first aerial searches via helicopter identified over 100 abandoned mine shafts that were big enough to hide a corpse. The task ahead of the search and rescue teams would be daunting. So they enlisted the help of an expert, a local man by the name of Doug Billings.
Doug Billings, who we call the Mine Whisperer.
Experts like Doug Billings.
He's also been called the Cave Whisperer. He knows all about every single mine that is out in the Mojave Desert.
By day, Doug Billings is a soft-spoken owner of his family's hardware store. In his free time, though, he was an experienced and savvy cave diver. The 48 Hours team went out with Doug to the desert, where he showed them the land that he knew like the back of his hand.
As I stand here right now, I'm looking at a beautiful turquoise rock, and I'm looking at another white crystal rock, and I'm looking at the skyline and these black iron mountains, and thinking about, prospectors who 100 years ago were with a pick and shovel trying to make a living out here. There's nature, there's history, there's wildlife out here you see. It is beautiful, it's God's country.
Doug doesn't like to call himself an expert, but his connection to this terrain runs deep. His grandparents had a homestead here. As he grew up, Doug started exploring the caves, dotting the very stretch of land where Erin Corwin went missing. Many of the mine shafts that the search and rescue teams were looking at, Doug had already been in.
And spent a decade or more going through every single one of them, reading journals about them, mapping them, taking inventories of what you could find in them.
When Erin went missing, the search and rescue teams came to Doug to get his advice on where to start looking, and he ended up joining them. The teams went out into the desert in red hats and yellow jackets and traveled in small groups of 2 or 3. Temperatures would swell above 100 degrees in the sun, so their days had to start before dawn. At first, the search was being largely done by volunteers who had to rig safety equipment, lights, and cameras just to look inside some of these mine shafts. Doug and the team assigned numbers to every mine they could find, and they color coordinated which ones had been searched and which ones hadn't.
Well, the goal was to basically check every mine until we either cleared them or found her. And there was a lot of jumping around at the beginning. I mean, you just had evidence and you had to decide of the evidence what was worthy and what's not.
All the while, the detectives interviewing Chris Lee were relaying information to the search teams. Those stories that Chris Lee told about the desert were coming in handy.
You had a story of the suspect saying he drove up a canyon over here, or some ranger saw something funny in this mine over here. So we were bopping all around.
But as days turned to weeks without finding Erin or her body, Doug and the rest of the team had to go back to the drawing board. Which parts of the desert could Erin be in? The answer might be found in Chris Lee's interrogation, the interview you heard in the beginning of the episode. The detectives spent hours in that interrogation room asking Chris questions and poring over evidence. They had already gone through Chris's phone and computer, where they found something strange.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, when we do analysis on your computers and your phones and all that stuff, are we going to see anything about murder or anything like that?
Probably.
Chris admitted to something. He said that he had been doing research on the best ways to get rid of a dead body. Chris chalked it up to harmless research he did after an offhand conversation with a friend.
I was having a conversation with one of the guys in the duty that it came up randomly, random marine talk about the best way to dispose of the body.
As Chris talked to the police, a detective asked more about his phone. Remember, the search and rescue team was trying to use cell phone data to find out where Chris may have traveled.
And when you took off Saturday, did you have your phone with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, but I put it in airplane mode.
Chris said he did have his phone with him, but it was on airplane mode to save the battery. Then the detective asked about Erin. Have you and Erin ever met in this area?
Have you and Erin ever met in this dirt area?
No.
Does she know about this area?
Maybe. I mean, if she drives down that way, you can see on there just roads.
It was in this moment that the cat and mouse game between Chris and the detectives in the room changed. Things became more confrontational.
And that's why I'm asking about her car, okay? Because we found her car.
How did you?
Yeah, it was parked in that dirt.
Okay.
Okay, so any reason why she would have been parked in that dirt?
No, not that I can think of. Maybe she was meeting up with somebody. But
The detective pressed Chris on his story.
All right, Chris. Here's the deal, man. We've been doing this a long time, okay? We found our vehicle, okay? We found your tire tracks. We know that you were going to meet her on Saturday. We know that. We know that you were going to go take her for a long drive and it was going to be a surprise. We know those things, okay? And we also know that you were one of the last people to see her alive.
The detective pulled his chair close to Chris, sitting just inches away from him, while Chris leaned back against the wall, stone-faced.
Have you ever been out with her up in the mountains or in this area?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Do you know if she's been in this area?
I don't.
But the police kept the pressure on.
The only problem is there's so many different versions of your story that nobody can believe you, honestly.
Then the police confronted Chris over Erin's pregnancy.
I don't know what might have been going through your head when you found out she was pregnant, but I can only imagine if it were me, I'd have a hell of a lot to think about. There'd be a lot of emotions. There'd be a lot of stuff built up inside. And I'm telling you, man to man, any man facing that type of situation has a lot to worry about.
At every question he faced, Chris denied any wrongdoing. At this point, it might have felt like they had reached an impasse. But finally, during a long silence several hours in, Chris revealed a small sliver of critical information.
I didn't see her on Saturday. I just saw her vehicle. I was out that way when I was picking up more tires for a fire. And I drove past it to see if she was in there, but she wasn't.
He told detectives that he did see Erin's car the day she went missing. I drove past it to see if she was in there, but she wasn't, Chris said.
I didn't actually ever see her on Saturday. I was worried that if I told you guys I saw her car because of my previous relationship with her, you would automatically assume I did something.
I was worried that if I told you guys I saw her car, you would automatically assume I did something. The interrogators tried to give Chris opportunities to confess.
I'm not here to play games with you, but I can tell you, something happened out there. Something definitely happened. It's only a matter of, was it planned? Was it a cold-blooded killing? Or did something just happen? That's all it is.
But Chris stuck to his story. And without Erin's body, the police had nothing directly linking Chris to her disappearance. So they were forced to let Chris Lee go with a warning.
We're going to find Erin. Right now, the Marine Corps base is helping us. They're gathering as many soldiers as they possibly can to go out and start checking all these areas. We're going to find her.
After his interrogation, Chris left the police department and went to Isabel Megley's White Rock Horse Ranch. His family had been living there as his military service ended, and they prepared to move to Alaska. It was an awkward arrangement. Chris and his wife and daughter all living in a spare room at the ranch. The news about Chris and Erin's affair and his possible involvement in Erin's disappearance put the ranch's owner, Isabel Megley, in an uncomfortable position.
Chris never reacted to anything. From the time she went missing, he never uttered a word to me. He never talked to me. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen.
In the days after Erin's disappearance, Isabel was becoming increasingly suspicious of Chris, and she was thinking back to the odd things Chris would do when he was around. One time, Isabel remembered Chris taking a cattle prod and shocking people for fun. He also made a garrote. It's a small handheld weapon made up of a nylon cord stretched tight between two small plastic handles. The finished product looked sort of like a pair of nunchucks. At the horse ranch, Chris even showed some local kids how to use it.
He was very proud of it. So we would put it on their necks and show them how to eliminate them. He found great pleasure in showing them.
Chris was no stranger to weapons. He'd grown up hunting. He served in Afghanistan. And back in the States, friends recalled how he liked playing with explosives and shooting target practice with his guns.
But something else stuck with Isabel. Something Chris told her after returning from the desert about a week before Erin disappeared.
He said to me, in a very exciting tone, "I found the perfect mine." He said, "No one will ever find it."
the mine was totally isolated. He had to go off-roading for 2 hours just to find it.
And I looked at the pictures that he showed me, but I couldn't tell a mine at that time. It was just rocks to me, and I wasn't interested, to tell you the truth. And then when she went missing, I told the detectives.
This was potentially a big lead. The pictures of this mine that Chris Lee took could be the key to finding Erin. Cave expert Doug Billings and the rest of the team were weeks into their search and still scouring the desert for Erin.
So I was in the sheriff's office going over some of the evidence, trying to narrow down the search. And we were talking about, is Erin really in a mine shaft? And he walks up to me and he pokes me on my chest a couple times, says, she's in a mine shaft. And he points to me and goes, and you're going to find her. And I said, okay, let's do it.
Over the course of the search, Doug dropped down 30 mines himself, but the entire search effort covered more than 100 mines in total. The teams were fighting 115-degree days, dehydration.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other hazards we were encountering right from the day one, in addition to the heat, was probably 1 out of every 3 mines we went into had a rattlesnake in it. A few of them had giant black widow nests blocking them, and you had rock falls, and we had even one incident where we had a big colony of Africanized bees basically infest our camp. And the heat was just terrible, you know, it was just so hot, you know, and it slows you down.
Eventually, Doug was brought into the crime lab to see the pictures that Chris Lee took during his trip out to the mines, the pictures that Isabel Megley had mentioned. Doug saw them and recognized the area.
She has to be in that canyon. And as I started making a list of everything there, I really had a lot of areas where I said, I'm not sure everything in there was searched. And so I went back and redrew up a new map and really highlighted the areas that got missed.
The mine shaft itself is small and nondescript, tucked between the desert and a small mountain range. While the search and rescue teams made their way toward this spot, NCIS investigators and local detectives were trying to keep an eye on Chris Lee. He no longer had anything tying him to the 29 Palms military base, and because they couldn't charge him with a crime, Chris was a flight risk. Things changed when Isabel Megley mentioned something else in passing to the detectives. She said that Chris borrowed Megley's car to run an errand, and when he returned, she noticed something in the back, this big metal contraption that she couldn't really make sense of.
I said, what is that thing in my car? It's a potato launcher. I said, what's a potato launcher? And out of the blue comes the detective. He came out and he said, what did you say? And so we repeated it, that it was in my car. I don't know what it is.
I have no idea why anyone would have a potato gun.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. again.
Potato gun is a high-powered destructive device that basically launches potatoes or projectiles of that type.
Here's where a small part of California law became very important to this story, because in California, that potato gun is classified as a destructive device. That meant owning one was illegal. Here's Isabel Megley again.
He said, that's a felony. We will get him right away.
And so Chris Lee was arrested, not because of Erin's disappearance, but instead because he was in possession of a destructive device, a potato gun. It's a relatively minor charge in the scheme of things, but the important thing is that even if Chris made bail, he'd have to stay in the state of California as a condition of his bond. It's a plan that investigators concocted to keep tabs on Chris as they kept up the search for Erin. And as each day passed, the pressure on those investigators was building.
This is a person. This isn't a case.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. again.
You put that photograph of Erin in your case, And that humanizes the person that you're looking for. You can't forget that this person has a family, has a husband, has a mother, has a brother, a sister, a friend. They wanted to know where Erin was. And you can't forget that.
Erin's case only captured local headlines at first. But on August 1st, People magazine published a 6-page cover story headlined Pregnant and Missing, Mystery of the Marine's Wife. The front page featured a picture of Erin and John. John in his blue Marine uniform and Erin in a matching gown, pasted next to a picture of Chris Lee in his cowboy hat. These faces were now plastered across magazines from coast to coast. The Corwin investigation had officially captured the national spotlight, so the pressure on investigators was going to be higher than ever. Around this time, NCIS Special Agent Randolph stepped onto an airplane, only to see row after row of passengers reading that very People magazine story.
You see a sea of it walking down that aisle. And I remembered, I think weeks after that, I kept seeing that image in my head there and like constantly reminding me, hey, you have a job to do.
With the national spotlight on Erin, the search for her continued back in the desert. But 6 weeks into the search, the sheriff's department scaled back their efforts, saying there was too much ground to cover and not enough manpower. Doug Billings was helping the remaining search and rescue teams pick up the slack. They were still focused on finding that mine that Chris Lee visited before Erin disappeared. Doug had been leading searches at spots that fit that description. They were wrapping up a search on the evening of Saturday, August 16th, when a firefighter took one last look deep down one of the mine shafts, a 10 by 10 gap in the rocks that looked down into a dark chasm. Flashlights didn't reveal much, but something stood out to the team as they approached it.
The smell of gasoline and the smell of decomposition.
This is reporter Beth Ford Roth again. She says the firefighters were on high alert. Could this finally be it, they wondered? Could this be Erin's resting place? The mines were dangerous. Some didn't have enough oxygen for a human being to survive.
So what the searchers were doing, they were taking buckets, putting a camera inside the bucket, and then lowering the bucket down the mines.
Beth Ford Roth has seen the terrifying video taken during this search. She said you can hear the bucket scraping against rock as it slid down into darkness.
All of a sudden you start to see color. And you see a little flash of pink. And you see, what looks like denim. And they realized that it was a body.
The firefighters then rappelled down into the dark cavern. There, laying on a ledge 140 feet beneath the earth, was Erin's body, identified by her tattered pink shirt and denim shorts. Then they looked around, because other things had been dumped down the mine shaft as well.
Basically, the person who killed Erin used it as sort of a dumping ground for every possible piece of evidence that would tie him to Erin.
There was a propane tank, a makeshift torch, a bottle of Sprite, some old tires, and a Marine Corps t-shirt. But when they were able to finally pull Erin's body out of the hole, they found something else, something wrapped around her neck. A nylon cord stretched between two pieces of rebar. A handmade garrote. Next time on 48 Hours NCIS, while Erin's family mourns her death, the manhunt for Chris Lee begins. Since Erin's body had been found in a desert mine, authorities were finally able to charge someone for her murder. and Chris Lee was suspect number 1. Before finding Erin's body, police were able to arrest Chris for possession of a potato gun. He had made bail and was told not to leave San Bernardino County. This way, authorities could keep tabs on him as they continued to search for Erin. Investigators knew Chris was staying at Isabel Megley's horse ranch before he was picked up for the potato gun, so they made their way to the ranch after they found Erin's body. By the time investigators arrived, Chris and his family were gone, breaking the conditions of his bail.
Christopher Lee and Nicole Lee did disappear, and nobody really knew where they went.
The family, they were planning to leave the area. How are they going to do this? Were they going to move themselves? Were they going to contract a moving company? We needed to know that information.
And so that's when Cliff asked me if I could assist with potentially trying to locate Lee in coordination with San Bernardino.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. and NCIS analyst Ashley DeChelfin scoured their military database to gather everything they could on Chris and zeroed in on where he might have gone. But since Chris had just been honorably discharged, getting an exact location proved to be difficult.
If you move in the military, usually there are contractors that can move you, and those are military records, part of your permanent change of station. However, with outside contracted military moves, it takes a little more digging to locate how someone is going to move.
Once a Marine moves on their own accord into civilian life, the military no longer keeps track of them. So NCIS personnel sifted through more than just military records.
Well, if he left 29 Palms, how did he leave? We did a little bit of research and found that he had rented a car and appeared to have driven up to Washington State and then crossed over into Alaska.
Eventually, NCIS was able to pinpoint where Chris had gone, back to his hometown of Anchorage, Alaska. Soon after, local authorities arrested Chris after finding him driving his mother's car. While searching the vehicle, they found blue climbing rope, several knives, and a handmade garrote. During all of this, investigators made sure to keep Laura, Erin's mom, updated.
It probably wasn't 30 minutes after I got that phone call saying that it was definitely Erin that I got another phone call saying Chris was arrested in Alaska.
Anchorage, Alaska is Christopher Lee's hometown. He was a small boy here once, playing in the snow, learning survival techniques like hunting and fishing. As a teenager, he played football on his high school varsity team. Once Chris graduated, he prepared to leave snowy Anchorage to join the Honorable Marine Corps. It's also here, in Anchorage, Alaska, where Chris Lee was arrested for murder.
I think he was confident enough that they would never find Erin's body that he could just go on with life.
I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales, and this is 48 Hours NCIS. Episode 5, Weapon of Choice.
Numb? I felt numb. You just go through the motions. You just do what you have to do.
Laura had been preparing to hear the worst for weeks. When she and her husband, Bill, finally got the call that they found her daughter's body, she did her best to stay strong for her other children.
It's midnight and Bill and I discuss, there's no reason to wake them up.
A few of her kids still lived in the house. A few had moved out and started their own families.
They might as well have a good night's sleep, so we decided we'd wait until the next morning to call them.
The weight of it all was unbearable. A few weeks after they confirmed it was Erin's body in the mine shaft, Laura and her family were able to properly grieve.
In the middle of September of 2014, we had a candlelight vigil at the barn where she had kept her horse.
A final goodbye in honor of Erin Corwin's life. The barn was located at the East Tennessee Riding Club in Oak Ridge. It's small, tucked away off the side roads. There were posters hung all over the walls, collages of Erin and her favorite things in life, her animals and her family. It was dusk. Everyone held a candle and sat on the bleachers. Anyone who wanted to share a few words about Erin was invited to do so.
A couple of her friends spoke. One of the youth leaders from church spoke. And the minister that baptized her as a child said the prayer over it.
John, Erin's husband, was there as well, but he didn't say anything. He held his candle, looking stoic. Beyond her friends and family, Erin's tragedy touched so many.
There were so many people, hundreds of people there. I hugged so many necks of people I didn't know. The support that we got from complete strangers is just unbelievable.
Laura was able to see the beauty in strangers empathizing with her. It gave her strength in the midst of her nightmare.
The body of a pregnant Oak Ridge woman has been found. 19-year-old Erin Corwin had been missing for nearly 2 months.
Friends remembered Erin as a shy teenager who loved animals.
We need to remember that she's a person first. She's a daughter, a sister, a wife, a friend.
Beth Ford Roth, who covered Erin's case for public radio, remembers how media outlets all over the country clung to this story.
When you see a photograph of Erin Corwin, you know why. Because she was sweet, naive, pregnant, Marine wife, a teenager from Eastern Tennessee, a family who loved her.
There was the obvious salacious nature of it all, but Beth believes it was more than that.
She's a small town girl. She doesn't have a lot of experience with men, and this is a crazy situation that she found herself in. She looked to the wrong person to help her get out of it.
Most of us have fallen for the wrong person when we were young. Most of us have made rash and dramatic decisions in our teenage years. But most of us get to learn and grow from them.
I think if women are honest with themselves and they look back at how innocent or naive they may have been at that age, it could have been any one of us. But we got to move on. We got to suffer the heartbreak and then move on. And Erin never got that chance. She'll never get that chance.
Police and NCIS had done their part, and now it was up to the judicial system to do theirs. It was time to get a conviction and, hopefully, some justice for Erin. Laura remembers the grueling wait for trial to start.
It took almost 2.5 years for the trial to happen. Started October 2016.
During that time, Chris Lee had been held in a San Bernardino County jail. He was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to murder before the start of the trial. Laura headed back to San Bernardino to be there in person. Her sister accompanied her. Erin's father, Bill, would not attend.
I don't think I could have contained myself. Unable to do that, that would have put more stress on my wife. She had enough stress with going to the trial herself, but to worry about how I would handle it would not be any better.
I attended every moment of the trial.
The San Bernardino County Superior Court is only 60 miles outside of LA and 90 miles outside of 29 Palms. The courthouse itself looks like any major municipal building, massive and old, with large imposing pillars at the front. The courtroom looks like a church, rows of wooden pews facing forward toward the bench where the judge presides. Chris walked in wearing a white button-down shirt, a blue tie, khakis, and a clean-shaven face. Chris sat down calmly on the defense side of the courtroom. Laura thought he looked different.
Chris lost a ton of weight.
Laura had met Chris years ago during the investigation, so when she first saw Chris enter the courtroom, she was shocked by his appearance.
I don't know that I would have recognized him if I was just walking down the street and saw him. He almost kind of looked scary.
Based on court transcripts, there was a long list of witnesses who were called to testify for the prosecution. This included Erin's mom, Laure, her husband, John, her hometown best friend, Jesse, and the Malikis, Erin's neighbors who lived downstairs. Laure's family expected her to report back about the trial daily, but some of the information was so dense, it was hard for her to keep all the facts in her head. During a break in the proceedings, Laure and her sister looked around the room. They noticed a woman sitting behind them, just a few feet away, writing on a notepad fervently. It was reporter Beth Ford Roth.
That first day, it just poured out of me.
Beth published daily updates from the trial on her blog.
To sit so close to Erin's family members, she was their daughter, their wife, and then also to sit in the same room with the man who ended her life. And I was filled with so much emotion, I didn't know what else to do, so I wrote it down.
Beth had initially started as a public radio reporter covering the case, but she had become so attached to Erin's story, she decided to continue reporting on it through a personal blog she created called Justice for Erin Corwin. Laure's sister approached Beth after court one day and said thank you. Because of her blog, Laure did not have to retell every detail of the trial to the rest of the family. Instead, she could just send them over to Beth's website.
When I was attending the trial and writing the blog, my older sister was following it on the blog. She hadn't heard the story before. And she called me one night after the day of the trial, and she said, "Oh my God, Bethy, that could have been me." And I said, "I know, it could have been me."
Beth attended trial every day. She said, in a strange way, the courtroom reminded her of a wedding.
Instead of the bride's family on one side and the groom's family on the other, it's Laure's family and friends on one side, and on the other side, it's the family, friends of Christopher Lee, the defendant.
Not far from her was the prosecutor.
My name is Sean Doherty. I'm a deputy district attorney with San Bernardino County, and I was the trial prosecutor on the case of People versus Christopher Lee.
Sean Doherty has been an attorney for over 20 years and has exclusively worked on homicide cases since 2009. As soon as he heard of Erin's case, it moved him. Doherty asked to be assigned to the case.
The theory of my case is that Chris Lee was about to discharge from the Marines, that he had planned and told his wife that they were going to move their family back to Alaska.
But there was a hitch.
As the result of his relationship outside of his marriage with Erin Corwin, she had become pregnant and she had told him he was the father, which would interrupt not only his marriage but his plans. Chris Lee backed himself into a corner, and the only way out was to kill Erin.
Prosecutor Doherty appeared to have a plethora of evidence at his disposal. He started by showing the video footage from inside the mine where Erin was found.
And then it sort of stayed on that image. And it was kind of hard to make out because of the fact that Erin had been there for 6 weeks in the heat. And jurors were covering their mouths. I was looking down. Erin's mother was looking down. Even the defense attorney would look up and then look down.
But Beth noticed one person who didn't look away.
Christopher Lee was forward, looking like this the entire time. And I was thinking, I never met Erin. I can't look at this. The jurors never met her. They can't look at this. At the very least, he had a friendship with her, and he was almost like looking at his handiwork.
With pictures and visuals, Prosecutor Doherty was able to ensure that the jury would see the gruesome end Erin met.
They stayed on a photograph of her hand, and you could see the nail polish. You couldn't really recognize her, but you saw the fingernail polish, and all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, she's a 19-year-old girl.
Beth kept an eye on Chris Lee through it all.
He just did not show any emotion that someone who was friendly with Erin, let alone someone who had an intimate relationship with her, would have had. I couldn't believe it, but then A guilty man doesn't know how an innocent man would act.
Prosecutor Doherty continued on, establishing Erin as a sweet young girl who could be easily influenced, then went through each piece of evidence in great detail. The fact that Chris's story changed multiple times during initial questioning. Before Chris was even brought to the station, he was caught lying to the police when they first asked him questions outside of his apartment building.
They inquired about his neighbor, Erin Corwin, and Chris Lee's initial response was, "I don't even know her. I know who she is, but that's about it." Later that day, they found out that there in fact was a relationship, and he more than knew her.
Once Chris was brought in for questioning, he admitted to the affair with Erin. In that same interrogation, he would get tangled up in another lie. At first, Chris stated he did not cross paths with Erin at all that day she went missing. He just happened to be in the desert doing his own thing. But then there were the tire tracks found by her abandoned car.
When investigators looked at those, they looked visually similar to Chris Lee's Jeep. They told him that they had that evidence and asked him if he wanted to change his story.
Chris changed his story again.
He, at that point, said, "I didn't see her that day, I did see her car."
In that same interrogation, Chris was asked if they would find anything suspicious in his search history if they checked.
And Chris Lee indicated that he had been searching for the best way to get rid of a dead body.
During the interrogation, Chris claimed that he and some fellow Marines had a benign conversation about how to dispose of a body. Chris said his internet search was out of pure curiosity. Chris started to describe the different tactics he had found online. Here's a bit of that recording from the interrogation room.
What were the results? What did you find out?
Pigs.
Pigs?
Mm-hmm.
What does it say pigs do?
They eat them.
Are you serious? I've never heard of that.
Chris said one of the best ways of getting rid of a body was feeding it to pigs. Chris continued on with his findings, describing one scenario that was particularly relevant to the trial.
He also mentioned burning a body with tires, or getting a body extremely hot. And then later in the interview, it indicated that tires can become extremely hot when they're set on fire.
And remember, tires were found in the mine shaft with Erin's body and a propane tank, the same mine Chris had talked about earlier with friends in town.
He was excited about having discovered these mines that he felt no one knew anything about.
But it wasn't just tires and a propane tank found in the mine. Authorities also found a soda bottle with DNA evidence.
And on the mouth of the Sprite bottle was both Chris Lee's DNA and Erin Corwin's DNA.
The matching DNA evidence was especially damning. Bit by bit, all the evidence was mounting up against Chris. For Prosecutor Doherty, there was no way Chris could explain all this.
All the circumstantial evidence was somehow explainable. It would make him essentially the unluckiest man in the world.
From changing his story to the tire tracks that matched his Jeep, to the DNA evidence placing him at the scene of the crime, things were not looking good for Chris. Then the defense decided to do something very unusual, put their defendant, Chris Lee, on the stand as their one and only witness. Here's Beth Ford Roth again.
When his name was announced, there was sort of this electricity in the courtroom because no one had any idea that he was going to testify.
With the defense having only one witness, who happened to be the defendant himself, it seemed there was hardly a case to be presented. It didn't make any sense to Beth why they'd bring Chris Lee to the stand.
The evidence against him was so overwhelming. What could he possibly say? Maybe they're just trying to make him human enough. It was shocking, to say the least.
Beth wasn't wrong. The defense tried to humanize Chris in front of the jury. Chris seemed ready to take the stand.
He was wearing his his crisp white shirt and a blue tie and khaki pants, and his hair was cut short, and he was handsome. And he had a charisma about him that wasn't captured in any photograph I'd seen before.
The defense started to question Chris Lee.
Asked about his childhood, what his hobbies were, to make him seem like, he could be anyone's kid. Although his hobbies were things like blowing things up. They were trying to make him seem like a, oh gosh, golly kind of guy. And he loved his wife, and he loved his daughter, and he loved his country. And that's the only thing that meant anything to him, was to be a Marine and to protect his country.
The questioning went on like this for a while. Nothing about the actual case. Nothing about Erin. The defense pushed for the jury to sympathize with Chris, the young patriotic Marine.
I had a good feeling in this case, just based on how the evidence played out, that he was going to have to testify, and he was going to have to either explain away all the circumstantial evidence against him or admit that he did it, but come up with some reason for why he did it.
And that's exactly what happened.
The defense attorney asked Christopher Brandon Lee, did you kill Erin Corwin? And Chris said, yes, I did. That was the first time that he admitted he had done it.
The courtroom was still reeling from Chris admitting that he killed Erin. It was at this stage of the trial when everything came out in the open.
It was like slow motion. To admit to the crime within a half hour of taking the stand after lying about it for years was just, my hand was shaking trying to take notes and trying to stay in the moment and realize this was actually really happening. He was confessing.
There was the truth, according to Chris Lee, and then there was what really happened.
Christopher Brandon Lee made sure to match his story with the evidence that was found.
According to Chris Lee, on Saturday, June 28th, Erin met Chris by the Marine base. She climbed into Chris's passenger seat. There was a particular place Chris wanted to take Erin. He had scouted the spot less than a week earlier, but it was a long drive, and he wanted to be sure he had the route down. Because they weren't heading to an official trailhead. They were on their way to a remote, abandoned mine. Erin had told her friend Jessie over text she was excited. This all seemed very romantic to her.
He was planning a trip with Erin. Maybe he told her it was a big surprise, but he actually was going to tell her that they shouldn't be together anymore. And he was moving back to Alaska, and he was going to stay with his wife.
Chris says he got the breakup over with in the car.
Basically, he claimed that he told Erin, when I moved to Alaska, it's over between us, and that they listened to music for 2.5 hours until they reached the point where the mine was.
Despite breaking up with Erin, they continued on with the trip.
Chris Lee told the jury that he took Erin out to this area because he wanted to blow up a mine shaft, which was sort of curious because why would Erin be excited about accompanying him to blow up a mine shaft? It's not every girl's dream to watch this, hunk of man shoot a propane tank and watch it blow up.
Chris said Erin was not fazed by the breakup. She just wanted to spend time with the person she was in love with.
It was going to be a chance just for the two of them to spend the day together, alone. Erin didn't get a chance to get out often to use the car, and this was a chance for her to spend time with him and to be together.
Chris drove to a mine in the desert. He unloaded the car, a propane tank, lighter fluid, a torch.
When they reached that area, Chris tried to blow up a propane tank. This is his way of explaining why there was a propane tank down in the mine shaft.
According to Chris, he threw the propane tank down the mine and a lit torch so that it would blow up. But it didn't blow. He had forgotten to put the lighter fluid on the torch, so it didn't burn hot enough.
And that was just one more sign for him that his life was not going the way he wanted it to, and he felt desperate, and so he decided to play Russian roulette.
Remember, Chris was supposedly still very depressed. It wasn't abnormal for him to drive around with a gun in the back seat, as he liked to hunt and shoot at rattlesnakes and coyotes in the desert. After ending his relationship with Erin, and having failed to successfully blow up the propane tank, allegedly this was the last straw.
Now, when he first explained all of this, he said he only brought this .22 rifle. Well, there were enough gun experts out there to say, you can't play Russian roulette with a rifle. It has to be a revolver. So suddenly, there was a revolver there. So he took the revolver and he told Erin, I'm going to play Russian roulette. And Erin said, well, I can't watch this. And so she, in 110-degree weather, with sandals on, walked into the mine shaft.
There were actually 2 mines in the area near Chris and Erin. There was one that was a horizontal mine shaft that was more like a cave, but then there was another mine that was like a deep rabbit hole. Chris said the horizontal mine shaft is the one Erin walked into.
And that she just waited in there and then came back out when he was unsuccessful with ending his life playing Russian roulette.
After hearing the gunshot, that's when Erin walked out into the sun.
Erin came over to Chris and wanted to go home.
During Chris's testimony, Beth was sitting behind Laura in the courtroom.
I watched sort of the back of her head, just trying to imagine what is going through her mind.
Laura's eyes were fixed on Chris as he spoke. Over the course of the trial, prosecutor Sean Doherty had a feeling that the defense would call into question Erin's character, tried to dehumanize her as they had humanized Chris. Doherty made sure to prepare Laura for something like this.
Sean had prepared me. He said that he, may put some allegations against Erin. And I had said from the very beginning that if they're going to try to dig up dirt on Erin, they're going to have to make something up. But I never dreamt they would make up what they made up.
In Chris's testimony, Erin became so upset from watching him play Russian roulette that she broke down. He said she told him that she wanted a life with him and his daughter, that the 3 of them could run away together.
Chris talks about how he and Erin went on this ride and everything, and how Erin was talking about them getting together as a family, and he says, well, I'm not going to do that to my daughter. Erin's like, well, but I love her, and he actually said he was jealous of the relationship that Erin had with his daughter.
And it was at this point in Chris's jealousy that he allegedly pieced together the story. He found out something terrible, something that would throw him into a fit of rage, something that had warranted murder.
Chris asks Erin, or he says he asked her whether or not she had been molesting his daughter, and Erin, I guess, according to his version, kind of stammered a little bit, and then he got louder and asked her again, and she supposedly said yes.
The courtroom was shocked, silent. Beth, sitting in one of the front rows, shook her head in disbelief.
Chris testified that at that point, 2 hours from, the nearest phone, no cell reception, 110-degree weather, that pregnant Erin Corwin, 19, decided to confess that she had molested his daughter. With no way of rescue or no way of responding if he was going to act negatively, that she blurted out, "This is what I did."
The jury now faced their decision with new, damning information. Did Erin abuse Chris Lee's daughter?
And anybody that knows Erin knows that there's no way. There's just no way. Absolutely no way Erin would do anything like that.
Next time on the final episode of 48 Hours NCIS, is there any truth to Chris's story? A warning to listeners that this episode contains graphic depictions of violence. Just over 2 years since Erin left the Marine base and never came back, her family finally had the answer of what happened to her and who did it. Christopher Lee killed her. For the first time, they finally learned his story. Why? According to Erin's killer, she allegedly abused his daughter. The court was shocked by Chris Lee's testimony. It was hard to believe.
It kind of came out of left field. It kind of seemed like it was this last attempt to paint Erin in a horrible light, to make some type of excuse for his behavior. And it was hard to watch.
NCIS analyst Ashley DeChelfin kept up with the case thanks to reporter Beth Ford Roth's blog and the national news coverage, since NCIS's official involvement in Erin's story had concluded. The NCIS agents had done their job. They helped find Erin and the person who killed her. But Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. said it was hard to move on from a case they had worked on so intensely years before.
It never goes away, especially when you had such a big role in it.
In the news coverage, the agents remembered seeing a side of Chris Lee that chilled them.
When I saw it, his testimony, I was surprised by what he said that he had done to Erin Corwin.
I was surprised that he admitted what he did in the detail that he did.
I was surprised by his facial expressions, kind of like he was reading off
a script.
Yeah, the script.
It was shocking and almost robotic.
But was Chris Lee telling the truth? I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS. Episode 6, Last Breath.
The air in the courtroom when he testified, I think initially, became very, very heavy.
Prosecutor Sean Doherty was seated at the prosecution's table, the one closest to the jury when Chris testified.
You could feel the emotions in the courtroom. You could see it on the jurors' faces. Could have heard a pin drop, I think. Very quiet, very serious, very heavy. Yeah.
Prosecutor Doherty said the court was silent when Chris claimed that many months before he killed Erin, his wife Nicole was giving their daughter a bath when she noticed something wrong.
And that Nicole said, I think that maybe she's been molested. And I think Erin did it.
Reporter Beth Ford Roth sat in her usual seat in the courtroom, right behind Erin's mother, Lore. She had watched every second of the trial, making note of every piece of evidence. She didn't want to miss anything in her daily write-up for the blog. She knew the rest of Erin's family would be following along, and this part would be especially difficult for them to read. Up to this point, the court knew that Erin would sometimes babysit Chris and Nicole's daughter. So it might have seemed plausible to the jurors that something could have happened to the Lee's daughter, and that Erin could have done it. But the time came for Prosecutor Doherty to cross-examine Chris, and Doherty was prepared for something like this, Chris's last-ditch attempt to save himself. He spoke to Lore first to prepare her for this possibility.
When Sean first told me, I was just like, there's just no way. Absolutely no way Erin would do anything like that. Sean had actually asked him if they'd noticed any difference in their daughter's behavior once this supposedly all started. And Chris answered, no, like, why in the world are you even asking me this, you know?
Chris had made the allegation. Now he had to prove it. Beth watched how quickly the claim dissolved under pressure.
Did they call military police? No. Did they go to a pediatrician who would have been required to call the police? No. There was no evidence entered in by anyone to say there's evidence this child was molested.
Special Agent Randolph said the NCIS never received a report about the Lee's daughter on the 29 Palms Marine Base. It was known protocol that anyone on base who has any sort of problem, any criminal matter, could and should report it to NCIS.
There's at least one agent working 24 hours a day that can take any report of any wrongdoing, especially on a military installation, and we don't operate in secret. We interact with the commands and say, hey, we're here to assist. So that's why I was shocked. Being in that area, that was never reported to us.
Clearly, if Erin actually abused the Lee's daughter, her parents didn't appear to take it very seriously.
To say, well, we thought Erin did it like 6 months ago, but we kept letting her babysit and, I was still having a romantic relationship with her. No, we didn't tell anyone. We just sort of let it go. It didn't make any sense at all.
But as for why this allegation came up now, that made perfect sense.
Well, the reason to do this was to get the jury to vote for voluntary manslaughter.
Voluntary manslaughter is the crime of killing another person in circumstances that do not amount to murder. For example, killing without premeditation.
That's what the defense attorney in his closing arguments said, that this was not premeditated, very last minute. He didn't think about it at all until he was actually doing it. He didn't really know what he was doing, and it was brought in by this incredible love for his daughter and protection for his daughter. And therefore, he would not be guilty of first-degree murder, not even second-degree murder, but voluntary manslaughter.
When Chris Lee was arrested, he was charged with first-degree murder, killing with the full intention to kill. It's the most serious type of murder and punished accordingly. In California, if you are convicted of first-degree murder, you face 25 years to life in state prison. If you are convicted of voluntary manslaughter, it's a much lesser punishment. You face a sentence of up to 11 years in state prison and a fine of up to $10,000. So if prison was unavoidable, Chris wanted to do as little time as possible.
I argued during the trial that he wasn't confessing out of some sense of remorse or sadness or anything else. He couldn't care less about that, or Erin, for that matter. He was telling them that story in the hopes that someone would buy the heat of passion argument.
And in order for anyone to believe the heat of passion argument, his child abuse allegation against Erin would have to be airtight. The jury would have to believe it to be true.
It was horrifying because the only thing worse than a murderer is a child molester. And so Christopher Brandon Lee tried to make himself the second most terrible person in this story. And if Erin was the worst person, then he would have been justified for what he did.
In the courtroom, Beth couldn't believe what she was hearing.
My reaction was immediate emotion. I had to put my head down because I began to cry. This man not only broke this poor girl's heart, he murdered her, and now, to save his own skin, he was going to try and ruin her name and turn her into some sort of monster. It was so horrific. And I have a flash of looking at the jury, and the jury's face reflected that. It sounded like an absolute, complete, and total lie.
There was no evidence Erin Corwin was molesting his daughter other than from him. His story was ridiculous. Even from the basic fact of a 19-year-old girl being out in the middle of the desert with someone she loves and, according to him, confessing to a horrible crime just doesn't pass the smell test at all.
In the very first row of the courtroom, Lore sat listening. She watched Chris Lee admit to killing her daughter. And then she had to watch him try to avoid responsibility in order to shave off a few years from a prison sentence.
Chris was trying to cover all his bases, trying to do whatever he needed to do to make things less horrible for him.
Prosecutor Doherty had one more thread to pull that he hadn't already. According to Chris's testimony, he found out about Erin allegedly abusing his daughter from his wife, Nicole Lee.
So Nicole was sort of this little insidious thread throughout the trial. The jury never saw her testify, but she was there and her name was mentioned, and there was always a suspicion of what did she know? When did she know it?
There were no charges against Nicole, and while she was kept on call as a witness for both sides at points in the trial, she was never called to testify. Spousal privilege means that wives don't have to testify against their husbands, and the defense never did end up calling Nicole for reasons that are unclear.
She told more than one person that she didn't care if Erin had died, that if there's no body, there's no case, and that they'll never find the body, and that her husband needs to keep his story straight. So there's every indication that Nicole knew, in my opinion, but no charges have been brought against her.
It was only when the judge was questioning Chris's heat of passion argument that Nicole was called to court.
After Christopher Brennan Lee testified that Erin had abused his daughter, and that was the reason why he had killed her, the prosecutor asked that Nicole be brought into the courtroom.
When Nicole arrived in court, she seemed at peace.
She had a big smile on her face. She was wearing her husband's dog tags. She was dressed, business suit, makeup, just everything was great.
Nicole stood in the middle of the court in front of Prosecutor Doherty and the judge. Doherty said if Nicole's daughter really was put in danger, if Erin really was abusing her, he was prepared to call the child to the stand.
As soon as the prosecutor said, you need to have your daughter available to be brought in as a witness, she started to shake and got very, very angry. I think she was absolutely shocked that the prosecutor sort of called their bluff and said, okay, if you're going to use your daughter as a tool to try and get your husband off of murdering his mistress, we're going to ask her questions. If she was really abused, that we should want to find out what happened to her.
According to Beth, Nicole stormed out of the courtroom. Beth felt Nicole's emotional response wasn't out of concern for her daughter's well-being.
It was almost like at that moment she realized that that lie wasn't going to work and that her husband was going to get convicted of murder.
So if Erin was innocent, why would Chris kill her? To Prosecutor Doherty, Chris's motive was clear.
Chris Lee killed Erin Corwin because he didn't want the baggage of a child with another woman and the fact that she was going to be a part of his life for the rest of his life.
Chris, when he was on the stand, was talking about the fact that he joined the Marines because he wanted to protect our country. And he had several deployments, but none of them involved him being in action. And he was very disappointed that he did not get to kill anybody.
He actually said that.
He said that.
If that was painful for Lore to hear, the next bit was excruciating. A warning to listeners that what you're about to hear is graphic.
I knew about the garrote before the trial. It was still around her neck.
As Prosecutor Doherty cross-examined Chris on the stand, he felt Chris's story and the way he told it made murdering Erin sound sort of sterile and one-dimensional. Doherty needed to help the jury better visualize the crime. He had a strategy. He had prepared Laura for it, as he knew she would be watching in the courtroom.
Sean warned me that he was going to have Chris demonstrate how he used the garrote, and I did not watch it.
When I cross-examined Chris Lee and we reached the point where I was bringing out the dummy and the garrote, I believe my question was, show me how you did it. Show me how you killed her.
Reporter Beth Ford Roth was seated near the front of the courtroom as usual, her eyes fixed on Chris. She watched as he stepped down from the stand.
The prosecutor had sort of it looked like a giant rag doll, basically a human-sized doll. And he asked Christopher Lee to demonstrate on the doll how he used the garrote on Erin Corwin. I was absolutely shocked because he had no emotion about it. It was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that.
Chris Lee faced the court, his back to the judge. Beth couldn't look away.
We can see his face. The doll is in front of him. He puts the garrote around the doll's neck. And then when he twists it, he turns around. And the doll went up. It flew up in the air.
Beth heard a gasp. The demonstration was violent. But Chris didn't seem aware of this. He continued.
When he twisted it, he wasn't facing her anymore. She was back to back with him. He didn't have to look at her when he was doing this.
The people in court didn't have to imagine Erin's shock or how her body responded.
Because she was so tiny, her feet would have flown up in the air. And they never did find her shoes when she was down there. They must have flown off her feet.
Beth's eyes moved from Chris to Laura.
I sat there and put my head down and closed my eyes while he was demonstrating what he had done to my daughter.
And then the prosecutor timed what happened, just so that the jury could see how many moments, how many seconds, how many minutes he had to change his mind and stop doing what he was doing to save Erin's life.
Earlier in the trial, the medical examiner had testified that it would have taken 20 seconds for Erin to black out, which means that for 20 seconds, she experienced pure conscious panic.
And so the prosecutor timed out 20 seconds of what she must have experienced.
And I would ask him every 20 seconds or so, you could have stopped, you could have stopped, you could have stopped. The jurors' reactions, they're right in front of me. They're squirming in their chairs. Several of them are tearing up.
I think a lot of us hoped it was, she didn't see it coming. At least she didn't know what was about to happen to her, but she did.
The medical examiner testified that it would have taken 4.5 to 5 minutes for Erin to die. Chris stood with the dummy hanging over his shoulder, its legs kicked out and limp. He held the garrote taut until he was told to stop.
It was dead silent, and I got the point across. I stopped. They get it.
It was so brutal to know that he just stayed there after she was no longer conscious and held her like that for 4 minutes to make sure she was dead.
The demonstration proved that Erin's death was no accident, regardless of whether it was voluntary manslaughter or first-degree murder.
What I was showing to the jury is he had plenty of time to think about life, letting someone live, or think about killing them. And once you've had that opportunity, that's premeditation, deliberation, when you choose death. And that's certainly what he did, and he could have stopped, which even further shows premeditation, deliberation.
In the desert, with the garrote still around Erin's neck, Chris had to get rid of her body.
The prosecutor asked how Erin ended up in the mine, and he said, I dragged her with the garrote, and she went down headfirst into the mine.
He didn't initially want to answer, and eventually he admitted that's the way he did it. It was important for the jurors to hear that. It was important for everyone to hear that. But he did. He threw down like a piece of garbage.
Laura kept her head down during the demonstration, but she knew she would never forget it.
One thing that does kind of haunt me is what was going through her brain. What was she thinking when he was choking her? She was with somebody that she thought loved her, somebody she felt she could trust. And my only saving grace is I choose to believe that she was unconscious very quick, that she didn't have much time to think about it.
After 3 full days in court, spread across the month of October 2016, the judge sent the jury to deliberate.
The day the jury went out, I was so totally drained that I literally was tripping just walking. I could not pick my feet up.
Reporter Beth Ford Roth recalled that it didn't take long for the jury to come back with a decision.
So the jury was given the case the last day of trial after the closing arguments that afternoon, and by the next morning they had a verdict.
It was just a very scary day because you just don't know, what are all these people thinking? When the jury filed in, you're still very apprehensive. I don't have a good read on them.
The courtroom held its breath, awaiting the verdict.
Christopher Brandon Lee was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
When they read the verdict, I immediately thought, we've got justice for you, Erin.
Prosecutor Sean Doherty's strategies in court had paid off.
The special circumstance allegation in the case was lying in wait, and that is he essentially waited and watched for an opportunity to act, to kill, with the intent to kill. All of the evidence in this case pointed that that's exactly what he did.
Chris sat in the defendant's chair in handcuffs. His expression did not change.
I didn't look over at him. I've heard he didn't react at all.
Behind him, his mother started to cry. Laura, Erin's mother, fixed her eyes on Chris.
Chris would not look at me. When he was sitting on the stand and saying how sorry he was that he did this to her, I literally stared at him during that time, and he would not look up at me. If you're truly sorry, look at me and tell me you're sorry. But he would not look at me.
Chris was led away in handcuffs. The judge returned to his chambers, and the rest of the room filed out. After 4 long days in court and 2 years since Erin's murder, perhaps the community could finally start healing. But there would be no peace for Laura, not yet. Chris wasn't done fighting.
He filed an appeal on November 29th, 2016, the day of the sentencing hearing.
In his appeal, Chris claimed that had the jury been more fully instructed, it could have found that he did not premeditate and deliberate the killing, and therefore the jury could have convicted him of second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder. The appellate court disagreed and affirmed the judgment.
And they're basically saying you have nothing to stand on. But then his attorney has a chance to reply again. This could go on for years and years and years and years. It's just like you're going along just fine, and then all of a sudden someone rips your emotional scab off again.
Today, Chris is in prison in San Bernardino County. Since he lost the appeal he filed in 2016, he has not filed another. And since the day he was sentenced, when he couldn't look Lore in the eyes, it's not clear whether he feels any real remorse for taking Erin's life.
He's stolen so much from us. But I also talked about the huge ripple effect. Yes, it affects us. It affects her siblings. It affects her nieces and nephews. It affects her friends.
But Lore demonstrates an unbelievable grace.
I felt a peace that couldn't be explained. Pretty much through the whole trial, I had so many people praying for me. That's the only way I can explain the peace that I felt. I have no hate or animosity towards Chris. I've forgiven him a long time ago. If I was hateful and bitter, it wasn't going to bother Chris at all. It would destroy me. And I decided he's already taken enough from me. He's not going to get my heart, my mind, my soul.
Lore knows that Erin is not the only victim here.
Not only did he throw Erin under the bus, he threw his daughter under the bus. What's she going to think when she grows up and Googles all this?
With astonishing empathy, Lore thinks of the rest of Chris's family.
When his mom gave birth to him and holding him, the dream she had for him. And surely this wasn't one of her dreams. And how proud was she of him when he played football? And how proud was she of him when he joined the Marines? And how excited was she when he was getting discharged and coming home? Not only did he destroy our family, he destroyed his families too.
Following his sentencing, Chris Lee's military service record was amended with a dishonorable discharge. Beth Ford Roth, with her reporting background on military family life, says this is a huge deal.
So you're never supposed to say that someone is an ex-Marine. He's an ex-Marine. After he was honorably discharged, he was dishonorably discharged.
With dishonorable discharge status, the U.S. government does not legally consider Chris Lee a veteran, and therefore he cannot receive veteran benefits. It is an indelible mark on his service, permanent for the rest of his life. And while this doesn't have a serious effect on Chris serving a life sentence, it means his family isn't eligible for benefits either. But as far as we can tell, Nicole is still married to Chris. We couldn't find any divorce records. Her latest address is listed as Chris's mom's house in Alaska. At the White Rock Horse Rescue, where Erin and the Lee family first came together, Isabel Megley has reminders of Erin everywhere.
I had her horse. Her horse just passed away. Every time I saw that horse, I thought of her.
Erin's murder changed how Isabel runs the horse rescue.
I learned that anything can happen. The friendship I had with a volunteer is now different. I don't trust. I can't believe what they say. And it has changed me to be a little harder, but for the best, because it can happen. And you can see in this instant, good went to bad in a minute.
Beth maintains that it was a formative court case for her to cover as a journalist. She thinks of Erin often.
But there's this feeling of, oh my gosh, it all could have stopped at age 19. And it could have been me. It could have been my older sister. It could have been any 19-year-old girl who fell in love with the wrong guy.
Prosecutor Sean Doherty still defends Erin in a sense. He remembers how vulnerable she was.
I've heard the sentiment that Erin was at fault for having an affair. I just always thought it was important to keep in mind her age and her lack of experience.
As for John, Erin's husband, he is as enigmatic as ever. We know he was remarried after Erin's murder, and they had a child. He's divorced now. The NCIS agents officially closed the case once Chris was convicted, but Erin's story stays with them.
When you work a case like that, everyone's ultimate goal is to get justice for the victim and to ensure that families have closure. And obviously it was a very sad circumstance and a very sad thing that occurred. And I think my main focus was, are we getting justice for Erin and her family and the people who loved her?
In Erin's case, the NCIS agents helped ensure that justice was served. But her case was just one of many investigations that the agents were conducting at the time. Erin Corwin was just one victim who Special Agent Randolph and Analyst DeChelfin fought for.
You're working cases simultaneously. There's always mail coming in. Deliveries are going out, but mail's coming in. And it's a constant process. So there's no moving on, really. It's compartmentalized. This is what I'm working with here. This is what I'm working with here. Okay, we got a conviction here. Did we do everything we needed to do to shore this up and ensure that we did everything on our part? So you're never really over it, because I remember that case. I haven't forgotten it.
We are at the mine shaft where Erin's body was found.
In March 2018, almost 4 years after Erin's murder, Lore visits the place for the first time where her daughter took her last breaths. She goes with 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa.
I wanted the opportunity to be able to come up here to have a memorial service for her, like you see the flowers on the side of the road when someone has passed away. I wanted to remember the last place where my daughter was alive.
In the desert, Lore stands at the opening of the mine shaft. Wind blows against the sands.
It's hard to imagine how desolate it is here. Pictures don't do it justice. It's very desolate, very vast, but beauty, just a different kind of beauty.
Lore bows her head.
Erin Renee, our sweet, precious daughter, sister, aunt, friend. When you were taken from us, we lost our breath of fresh air, shy, loving, nurturing, trusting, naive animal whisperer. You were such a wonderful young lady, a gift from God. We were blessed to be chosen to be your family. I'm sure the angels were saying, come to Jesus as you left us here. My Erin-sized hole in my heart is a little bit deeper right now. To know that this was where her life was taken from her. To know that she had dreams that were stolen from her. Memories that were taken from us in this spot. Times that we could have spent together.
Do you feel Erin here?
No, Erin's not here. Erin's in heaven.
From CBS News and CBS Studios, this is 48 Hours NCIS. Original reporting by 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa. Anthony Batson is the senior producer for 48 Hours. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio. Special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard, CBS Studios senior vice president Rob Luchow, and Paramount Audio vice president Megan Marcus. Our podcast was written and produced by Jay Venables, Isabel Kirby McGowan, Kara Schillen, Max Johnston, Megan Nadolski, and Ian Enright. Additional reporting and recording by Isabel Kirby McGowan, Jay Venables, and Megan Nadolski. Our executive producers are Megan Nadolski and Ian Enright. Theme and music by Epidemic Sound. Original music from Goat Rodeo with additional music from Paramount. Final mix by Rebecca Seidel. Ian Enright is our fact checker. Our production manager is Megan Nadolski. I'm Natalie Morales. If you're enjoying this show, be sure to give it a rating and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. If you liked 48 Hours NCIS, check out the rest of our 48 Hours podcasts by searching 48 Hours on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.
Joshua Tree National Park is a very large and desolate area. There's not a lot of water in these areas, and it gets very hot during the day and very cold at night.
It's a beautiful area. The Joshua trees are like something out of a Dr. Seuss book.
Erin Corwin was a 19-year-old pregnant Marine wife.
On June 28, 2014, Erin woke up her husband, John Corwin, about 6 or 7 in the morning.
The initial story we received was Erin had gone to Joshua Tree National Park to look for nice hiking routes for her and her mother.
John called and he said, Erin's missing. And I'm like, what do you mean Erin's missing? And my first thought is she's gotten lost. Erin has no sense of direction.
I actually got a call from the base commander saying that he had sent out troops to help look for her, and they had found nothing. It becomes very drastic at that point. She's not very large, and she's not going to last long out there.
There was a massive search and rescue to locate Erin Corwin.
They searched in temperatures that climbed as high as 110, 115. The dogs were getting heat stroke. They even encountered killer bees. It was a really grueling, tough search.
You don't know what the monster is in the dark in the closet out there.
I think a lot of people first became familiar with Joshua Tree National Park through the album Joshua Tree by the Irish band U2 that came out in the 1980s. And there's a song on that album called Mothers of the Disappeared. But the words really spoke with what I felt like Laura must have gone through, not knowing where her daughter was, and out in the desert where the Joshua trees were, she was out there somewhere.
It was big news for such a small area. Everybody was talking about it. People were looking for her. There was buzz on base.
We know that she is out there. It's just a matter of us trying to figure out exactly where.
John did tell me that he thought she'd taken a Gatorade, which is nothing in those situations. He sounded concerned. There wasn't a lot of emotion in his voice, but John, that's John.
There seemed to be evidence that he liked to keep an eye on Erin and make sure that he knew where she was.
You're not pointing fingers. You want to find where Erin is. You're questioning him, of course. When was the last time you saw her? Where did she say she was going to go? Does she have any friends?
Erin was not the type of person who would just leave and not tell anyone. Her husband was calling her, her mother was calling her friends were calling her, and it went straight to voicemail. That was a sign that something was wrong.
When they handed me that card that said Special Investigative Homicide Team, it just makes your heart sink.
The NCIS mission is global.
We're on aircraft carriers, we're in foreign ports.
We watch after each other, we take care of each other.
NCIS deal with every type of crime: cyber, fraud, murder.
General crimes, counterintelligence, counterterrorism.
Every crime is a tragedy. It involves sisters, brothers, husbands.
That's the only way to find the truth.
We live in dangerous times, and we're never going to give up.
NCIS, the cases they can't forget.
I think agents become so attached to these cases because it's such a huge investment. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It takes so much focus, so much energy to stay on some of these cases, to follow them through to the end.
This is a person. This isn't a case. This is not a number. This is a human being. You can't forget that this person has a family, has a husband, has a mother. They wanted to know where Erin was, and you can't forget that.
Erin was one of our adopted children. She came to the house when she was 17 days old.
It's a lot to take in, especially from probably your least adventurous child, a child that you would never expect something like that to happen to.
A helicopter took off Friday morning.
The San Bernardino Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team paired up with NCIS agents for the massive job of finding Erin Corwin.
Last seen driving away from her home at the base for a trip to Joshua Tree National Park.
They had to comb through more than 300 rugged acres of desert, pitted with more than 1,000 abandoned mines.
So I flew out the next day. I was thinking when they find her, she's going to be really in bad shape and she's going to want her mom. Erin was petite, 5'2", small girl, blue eyes, dirty blonde hair, very pretty. Of course, I'm her mom.
At first, it seemed like a small story out in 29 Palms, but for me, it had a lot to do with photographs of her.
Beth Ford Roth was a journalist with National Public Radio in San Diego when she first heard about Erin Corwin. The story struck a chord.
You could see Erin was a shy, bashful, sweet, kind girl, and I had a soft spot for her because of her love for animals. It was hard to find a photo of Erin where she wasn't holding a cat or with her horse.
We are at East Tennessee Riding Club in Oak Ridge. This is where Erin first really experienced horses. When she first started, I assured her we would never get a horse. We ended up with 2. This place was actually Erin's second home, and I believe if she could, she would have slept here.
Erin and John met at the barn. She was like in 5th grade at that time. She was 15, then they kind of reconnected and they started dating on her 16th birthday.
John was great for Erin. He was a good kid.
He already knew he was going to be a Marine. Erin was 18 when she married John. They got married in November of 2012.
Soon after, Erin and John moved to the Marine Combat Base in 29 Palms, California. John took part in artillery drills that sometimes kept him out in the desert for as long as a month at a time, while Erin was left to adjust to living on a military base.
29 Palms itself is very unique because it's in a desert community, which is very remote. And there's not a whole lot there.
A base like this is very close-knit. You're going to go to the same grocery store. You're going to go to the same movie theater. You're going to run into each other. You're going to see everybody there all the time.
No one on the base reported seeing Erin leave, so NCIS agents naturally began their investigation with her husband.
He waited 24 hours to call to say that she was missing, which seemed sort of suspicious at first.
But John had passed a polygraph test. Authorities also said digital evidence led them to conclude that John had been at the base nearly the entire day Erin had gone missing.
Shortly after Erin Corwin disappeared, investigators found her car abandoned.
Erin Corwin's car was located significantly far from Joshua Tree National Park's entrance. She was not with the vehicle. It was a mystery to us why that car was parked in that location and not closer to the park.
Erin's mother, Laura Haviland, sounded the alarm to Erin's friends.
This is not the time to be loyal. If you've heard from her, you need to let somebody know.
I searched through a bunch of individuals' Facebook friends, including Erin's, and I was trying to find common links between who was friends with who and how those people knew each other. And I slowly grew to know Erin from my research. She started volunteering at the White Rock Horse Rescue Ranch, and that's where she started meeting some people and slowly gathering her social circle.
Agent DeChelfin discovered that Erin had become close friends with her next-door neighbors, Marine Corporal Chris Lee, his wife Nicole, and the couple's 5-year-old daughter, Liberty. They all loved horses and spent a lot of time at the rescue ranch.
She came to the White Rock Horse Rescue to find a horse for her own personal use. And Nicole would come with her because Nicole had a horse, so they rode together.
Erin also loved children and became a babysitter to the Lee's daughter.
And Erin really took her in, and Liberty was very, very fond of Erin, and she really bonded with that little girl.
I think Erin was enjoying some aspects of being a Marine wife, and other aspects I think it was harder than what she anticipated.
Harder and full of heartache when, after posting news of her pregnancy on Facebook early in 2014, Erin suffered a miscarriage.
I don't think either one of them knew how to handle that grief process.
Erin was devastated and really didn't have anyone to talk to. And Christopher Lee saw that as his in to Erin. He knew the right way to approach her because she was hurting so badly. And as he even said, we were two broken pieces that fit together.
He took advantage of her being so naive, and he manipulated her. I actually called Jessie and asked her about it.
Jessica Trentham, also known as Jessie, was Erin's best friend who was still back in their hometown of Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Erin definitely confided to Jessie in a different way than she confided with me. June 29th, after Jessie and I had talked on the phone, she texted me and said that Erin was going out to the desert with someone by the name of Chris Lee.
Erin confided to Jessie that she and Chris Lee had become close, developing feelings for each other.
Christopher Lee was not happy with the direction his life was going in. And Erin was a next-door neighbor who was beautiful and innocent and sweet. Christopher Lee preyed on the part of Erin that loved to take care of things that were hurting. And he used that to get her to fall in love with him.
We have this responsibility to help protect the warfighter, and by extension, the warfighter's dependents. We take that very seriously.
I remember being on an airplane. Every other passenger had that People magazine cover with John Corwin and Erin Corwin's picture. I was like overwhelmed. This is so big, and I'm a part of this. That just also reminds you, you have a job to do.
NCIS agent Clifton Randolph had learned that a friend of Erin's possessed important information about the 19-year-old's disappearance. So he quickly dispatched Agent Sean Nash to the home of Jessica Trentham back in Tennessee.
I first meet Jessica at her residence. We did a manual search of her phone, and we identified several text messages that were important to the investigation. It appeared that Erin and Christopher Lee had a romantic relationship.
Jessica confirmed the information in those texts, telling Agent Nash that Erin Corwin and Chris Lee had been having a torrid love affair for months, ever since Chris learned of Erin's miscarriage.
He made her feel important by saying, I'm going through a really tough time now, too. I don't connect with my family anymore. I play Russian roulette every morning. That decides whether I'm going to have another day or not. And Erin had a purpose now. It was to keep Chris alive. Jessie was the only person who knew that relationship was ongoing.
To this day, I have a hard time wrapping my brain around that, because that's not who Erin was.
That wasn't the only secret Erin had been keeping from her mother.
I did not know that Erin was pregnant. I found out When I got to the apartment, John told me she was pregnant.
This new pregnancy came only months after Erin's miscarriage, and John was overjoyed. He believed he was the father and had no idea that Erin had secretly confided to Chris that the baby was his, according to Jessica Trentham.
Erin texted her friend Jessie in Tennessee that Chris was very excited about it, that he wanted to tell everyone.
At least, that's what Chris apparently told Erin. In the meantime, he was making plans to move his family back to Alaska. In late June 2014, Chris was under pressure from all sides when he texted Erin and invited her out to the desert for a surprise.
Supposedly, he had a special surprise for her in response to her pregnancy.
Erin texted Jessica, and he said he's honestly not sure how I'm going to react. Jessica had texted back to Erin some emojis with a ring and a diamond, and then kiss symbols. I would assume that would be an engagement ring.
The strong bond between Erin and Chris did not surprise Isabel Megley, the owner of the horse ranch where the couple spent so many hours.
Chris Lee loved to make people laugh. And Erin was somebody that gave him the pleasure, whereas Nicole was very strict, told him what to do, and that's what the problem was that Chris and Nicole didn't have that relationship, but he found the relationship with Erin.
Upon hearing about these tangled relationships, investigators, with the help of NCIS, went to question Chris Lee.
He said that he knew Erin, but they were just acquaintances, and he knew her from the horse ranch.
Detectives were also questioning Isabel Megley, and she told them about a memorable conversation she'd had with Chris the weekend before Erin went missing.
Chris was saying he went on an excursion in the desert with his friend. And I said, oh, that must have been fun. He said, oh, wait till you see my pictures. And I found the perfect mine. I found this mine that nobody will ever find. And I just said, wow. And then when she went missing, I knew she was in a mine. So I told the detectives.
As NCIS agents and deputies from the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office continued their joint investigation into Erin Corwin's disappearance, they discovered that Chris Lee had been looking at mines the weekend before Erin disappeared. But which mines?
Joshua Tree National Park and the surrounding area, they have thousands of mines.
But investigators needed an expert to help them comb through all those mines. Search and rescue members pointed to one man, Doug Billings.
You guys okay back there? You seatbelted in?
Doug Billings is an expert in caves and mines. He actually grew up in the area of Joshua Tree, and as a child spent his summers there with his grandparents.
Doug Billings is the caveman.
Then I'm just gonna rig the rack.
He's also been called the mine whisperer.
All right, everything looks good. Unclip.
He knows all about every single mine that is out in the Mojave Desert.
Backwards we walk.
And he's the only human being on the planet who does.
There's a lot of loose debris on the ledges. Pretty crumbly. I didn't even know Erin's name at the beginning. And then I shortly got a call back saying, as they found more information, that there was some information about abandoned mines possibly being involved in the search.
There's so many mine shafts out there. And so much vast territory. Words don't do it justice. It's just a whole lot of nothing out there.
But Doug and the sheriff's search and rescue team pushed on. And then, on July 1st, 3 days after Erin told her friend that she was heading into the desert to meet Chris Lee, investigators brought the Marine in for a formal interview. He was cooperative, did not request a lawyer, and honest enough to admit that he and Erin had been having an emotional affair.
She was someone that I could tell stuff that I didn't want to tell anybody else, because she was a secret, so I could tell her my secrets.
Christopher Lee had the advantage over Erin Corwin in the sense that he was older, he had seen combat, he had more experience than her, that he could manipulate the situation with Erin Corwin.
It never went past kissing.
Okay. And you never had any type of intercourse with her?
No. As far as we went was making out and hands moving across each other's bodies. I thought I was in love with her, but it was just that make-believe life that I was in love with.
But you told her that you loved her. Did she tell you that she loved you?
She did.
Okay.
And I honestly, I kind of think she meant it.
3 hours into the interrogation, investigators changed tactics.
All right, Chris. Here's the deal, man. I've been doing this a long time. Okay, we're gonna find out what happened to Erin. She's not okay. Something happened out there, and she's not okay. And we're not gonna stop until the truth is out there. We know that you met with her on Saturday morning, the day that she went missing. We know that. And we also know that you were one of the last people to see her alive. Are you a cold-blooded killer? Did something happen? Was there an accident?
I didn't see her on Saturday.
Okay, we're past that. This moment, okay, this moment right now is the most important moment of your life. We can't change what happened in the past. We can choose our fate from right now. If something happened, whatever it is, we have to be honest.
No, you guys don't.
Because you know she was pregnant with your child.
She wasn't pregnant with my child.
Maybe you really don't know, I don't know. But that's what she's telling everybody.
Detectives strongly suspected Chris Lee had killed Erin Corwin, but lacked the proof to arrest him.
We'll get you home right now, all right?
After 4 hours of questioning,
He's like, oh, you? He's arrested right here?
investigators turned him loose. By sheer coincidence, Chris Lee finished his tour of service with the Marines that weekend, and with no charges pending against him, he was honorably discharged. But the discharge meant he had to move out of base housing. So Chris, his wife Nicole, and their 5-year-old daughter Liberty temporarily moved into an extra room at Isabel Megley's horse ranch.
It turned out to be very stressful. The police were here, the detectives were here.
Detectives were talking to Megley when she casually mentioned an item she says Chris Lee had left in her car. A potato gun, or potato launcher, like this one.
A potato gun is a high-powered destructive device that basically launches potatoes. Projectiles of that type.
Out of the blue comes the detective. He said, that's a felony. We will get him right away, because he put it in your car. So they went and got a warrant based on the potato launcher.
It actually qualifies in California as an explosive device.
That is how they got him arrested, because they couldn't get him arrested without a reason.
After being arrested for possession of a destructive device, Chris Lee got a lawyer, made bail, and was ordered not to leave the area. With the desert temperatures soaring, and no sign of Erin, her mother, who had held out hope that their 19-year-old daughter would be found alive, came to accept that Erin was likely dead, murdered by the man who had stolen her heart.
They found on her laptop that she had been looking for apartments in Alaska. I believe he was probably leading her on. I know he was writing her love notes.
When the relationship was found out and they felt they couldn't see each other anymore, he wrote her a poem that was found actually in her materials after she disappeared.
Like it or not, you still hold a piece of my heart. Ready or not, we were gonna get caught. Don't give up, and I won't too. Hopefully, like me, you still think I love you.
Erin bought into it hook, line, and sinker.
But by winning Erin's heart, Chris had backed himself into a corner. How was he going to explain Erin's pregnancy to his wife, Nicole?
I believe at some point Chris Lee knew that the gig was up. He knew that the only way he was going to be able to solve this problem was to kill Erin Corwin, so he began figuring out the best way to do that without getting caught.
Thanks to information provided by Isabel Megley, investigators had located these photos of abandoned mines that Chris and a friend had taken the week before Erin went missing. Detectives presented those photos to Doug Billings.
And I looked at them and I said, yeah, I know exactly where those are, and described the area.
Doug pinpointed a nondescript hole in the ground called the Rose of Peru mine.
And it was just like, she has to be in that canyon.
Told it was the last mine of the day. The way they conducted the search was to drop essentially a video camera down to the bottom of the mine shaft. They were getting ready to end it for the day, and at the bottom of this particular mine shaft, they saw the body of Erin Corwin.
And sure enough, she was right there. She was steps away from me.
On August 16th, at about midnight, our time, the phone rang, and it was one of the detectives telling me that they had found a body down a mine shaft, and they were pretty sure that it was Erin. I would say it's a major miracle that they found Erin. It's like finding a needle in 1,000 haystacks.
Detectives immediately went to the horse ranch to arrest Chris Lee. But there was a surprise in store. Chris and his family had vanished. After Erin Corwin's body was discovered in the Rose of Peru mine shaft, an autopsy revealed that the 19-year-old had been strangled. But Erin's body was too badly decomposed to determine if she was pregnant.
Christopher Lee strangled Erin Corwin with a homemade garrote.
It's pretty brutal. It's horrifying. It's a terrible thing to even imagine someone doing to somebody else.
Let alone somebody that they had a romantic relationship with, somebody that they had been intimate with.
It makes you wonder if she knew who she was getting involved with. Did he ever really care about her?
Erin's remains were turned over to her husband, John.
Erin was cremated. John has her ashes. A few of us in the family have a few ashes in like a little pendant. The Marines did grant him leave. He was pretty quiet. That's typical John. It's hard to read him, to know what his thoughts are.
John was part of the candlelight vigil later held at the Tennessee barn, where Erin first learned to ride.
I hugged so many necks of people I didn't know. The support that we got from complete strangers is just unbelievable.
In the days following the discovery of Erin's body, NCIS agents and sheriff's deputies had continued the manhunt for Chris Lee, who had fled from the horse ranch along with his wife and daughter.
That's when Cliff asked me if I could assist with potentially trying to locate Lee in coordination with San Bernardino. And I have access to database checks, and The average person does not have access to those same databases.
NCIS agent Ashley DeChelfin was able to track Chris Lee to his home state of Alaska, and on August 22nd, 2014, 6 days after Erin's remains were found, Chris Lee was arrested for her murder. Prosecutor Sean Doherty says evidence found in Lee's car further tied him to Erin's murder.
When Chris Lee was arrested in Alaska, the vehicle he was pulled over in contained a makeshift garrote.
That garrote was similar to the one found wrapped around Erin's neck. It was just one of several pieces of evidence discovered with Erin's body. That mine shaft turned out to be filled with evidentiary gold.
At the bottom of the mine was, along with Erin, was a propane tank. That propane tank was seen by a neighbor, a fellow Marine, that morning in the back of Chris Lee's Jeep. He asked Chris Lee about it, and Chris Lee said he was going to blow up a mine shaft. That propane tank was borrowed from a horse ranch that both Chris Lee and Erin Corwin adopted and took care of horses at.
He saw my propane tank and said, "Can I have this?" And I said, "You can have it if you want it." So he took it, and he never brought it back.
All of the evidence would point to him being at the mine shaft with Erin Corwin and him committing the murder. There was numerous pieces of circumstantial evidence.
There was a makeshift torch, which was a stick with a Marine Corps t-shirt wrapped around it. And there was only one person's DNA on the t-shirt, and that was Christopher Lee. The most damning piece of evidence was a Sprite bottle with the cap still on it, and it had the DNA of only two people, Erin Corwin and Christopher Lee.
In October 2016, after a change in venue, and more than 2 years after Erin had kissed her husband goodbye, Chris Lee stood trial for first-degree murder in a San Bernardino courtroom. Erin's mother was there, filled, she says, with an eerie calm.
I felt a peace that couldn't be explained pretty much through the whole trial. I had so many people praying for me. That's the only way I can explain the peace that I felt.
Like everyone else at the trial, Erin's mother was struck by the dramatic change in Chris Lee's appearance.
Chris lost a ton of weight. I don't know that I would have recognized him if I was just walking down the street.
The prosecutor presented a parade of witnesses, and after 8 days of wrenching testimony, the prosecutor ended his case by showing jurors the love poem Chris Lee wrote to Erin Corwin. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The defense would need something dramatic to counter the state's evidence, and it did not disappoint.
I just felt so much hate, so much rage. I wasn't gonna let anybody hurt my daughter again.
No one was prepared for what Chris Lee would say when he took the stand in his own defense, but his testimony brought the trial to a standstill.
And I think that the jury saw exactly what type of person Christopher Lee was.
I was surprised when I saw his testimony, what he said that he had done to Erin Corwin. And the manner and his facial expressions, kind of like he was reading off
a script.
Yeah, a script.
The former Marine began explaining to the jurors that on June 28, 2014, in the desert surrounding Joshua Tree National Park, he and Erin were two very different people with two very different agendas.
He claimed that he told Erin, "When I move to Alaska, it's over between us."
I sat there and put my head down and closed my eyes.
But Laura Haviland says she heard every word.
Chris Lee, in his direct testimony, essentially said that while he was out there, he'd been having a hard time emotionally and struggling. And at one point while he was there, he grabbed a weapon and was playing Russian roulette. Erin became very disturbed by that, became upset. She told him that she wanted to be part of his daughter's life, that she wanted to be with him and wanted to move to Alaska with him. He became enraged and told her that his daughter was his and not hers, and she didn't have any right to want to be with her. And asked Erin if Erin had molested his daughter, and Erin said yes, but...
That accusation came out of the blue, but hit like a lightning bolt. The prosecutor says it was blatantly false because Chris and Nicole had never called police about the alleged abuse, and they had never taken liberty to a doctor to report it.
His story was ridiculous. Just even from the basic fact of a 19-year-old girl being out in the middle of the desert with someone she loves, and according to him, confessing to a horrible crime, just doesn't pass the smell test at all.
Not only did he throw Erin under the bus, he threw his daughter under the bus. There's just no way, absolutely no way Erin would do anything like that.
But Chris did not back away from his story. He doubled down on it, saying he was stunned by Erin's supposed confession.
I just kept choking her. I don't know how long it was. It might have been 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it felt like forever. And I just kept choking her.
One thing that does kind of haunt me is what was going through her brain. What was she thinking when he was choking her? She was with somebody that she thought loved her, somebody she felt she could trust. And my only saving grace is I choose to believe that she was unconscious very quick, that she didn't have much time to think about it.
Then you threw her down a mine shaft, didn't you?
I did.
Like a piece of trash.
I threw her down the mine shaft, yes.
Like a piece of trash. Right?
Is that a question?
Yes.
Yes.
It's important for the jurors to hear that. It was important for everyone to hear that he threw her down like a piece of garbage.
Journalist Beth Ford Roth said the courtroom became extremely quiet as everyone absorbed the horror of Erin's murder.
And I had to put my head down because I began to cry because it was so horrific to me that this man not only broke this poor girl's heart, he murdered her. It was so horrific.
There was no evidence Erin Corwin was molesting his daughter other than from him.
But Prosecutor Doherty was not done with Chris Lee.
Prosecutor had sort of a giant rag doll, basically a human-sized doll. He puts the garrote around the doll's neck, and I heard a gasp.
And you were going to follow through with that decision? Yes. Okay. That's about 10 seconds in. You could have stopped. Right?
No.
Minute 20? Still no, huh?
No.
You can let go. Can you let go now?
Yes, sir.
Seconds can drag on forever when you're just silent, and I think it was powerful, and I think it got his point across. At any time during that 3 minutes when he's strangling her, he could have stopped, which even further shows premeditation, deliberation.
During closing arguments, the defense strategy became clear.
Was it murder?
When Chris Lee's lawyers argued his client was guilty only of involuntary manslaughter.
We have to talk about what the evidence actually is.
Not first-degree murder. He claimed Chris had not planned to kill Erin.
The day the jury went out, I was so totally drained that I literally was tripping just walking. I could not pick my feet up. It was just a very scary day because you just don't know, what are all these people thinking?
By the next morning, they had a verdict.
Guilty of murder in the first degree.
We, the jury, in the above entitled
When they read the verdict, I immediately thought, we've got justice for you, Erin.
Chris Lee received a sentence of life without the possibility of parole.
It's a case I'll never forget it.
This is a case I won't forget either because it's just something that hits close to home. There were times where it was a little emotional because she's 19 and she had her whole life ahead of her.
Laura Haviland asked if she could accompany us to the mine shaft where Erin's body was discovered. She had never been there, but wanted to see it for herself.
When you were taken from us, we lost our breath of fresh air. I know without a doubt that you are walking the streets of gold with Jesus, and I will see you again.
Nearby, Laura also visited Erin's garden, the makeshift memorial Doug Billings created near Joshua Tree National Park.
I want people to know that Erin was sweet, naive, an incredible young lady. She was not a perfect teenager, but you couldn't have asked for a better teenager. When Erin was talking to you, you felt like you were the most important person in the room. We just didn't have enough time with Erin. You know, you're not supposed to bury your babies. She just went too fast.
We have to show that if you murder a dependent spouse, we will pursue you relentlessly, and at some point, you will be brought to justice.
"48 Hours. Don't miss an episode."
Thank you.